Good morning and welcome to everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Public Safety Summit. I am proud to introduce our moderator for today, Deputy Mayor for Public Safety and Justice, Lindsay Appiah. Deputy Mayor.
Good morning, and again, welcome to the Public Safety Summit on behalf of Mayor Bowser. We thank you for joining us. One of the things that the mayor has said to us repeatedly is that there's no more pressing responsibility that we have as a government, and certainly the collective we, than to provide for the safety of our residents and visitors. And certainly, we recognize that while we've made progress over 9 years, that we're not where we want to be, that our residents, we hear across the city, don't feel safe and in many respects aren't safe. But we certainly know that one of the things that's true in the district is that we have overcome many hard things when we work together. And so we have to ask ourselves, and a question the mayor asks all of us is, what can we do differently, individually and collectively, in order to get different outcomes? And so today is a day for introspection, for education, and for really all of us to thought partner together about what can we do differently in order to reduce crime in our city and to ensure that we have a city that residents across all 8 wards and all of our visitors are safe and feel safe. And so you'll see the agenda behind me. We have a wide variety of our ecosystem partners joining us, and you'll get really, for many of you, a bird's eye view into some things that you don't normally see, right? Our MPD will be doing a crime briefing. We'll talk with various partners about the current state of the ecosystem. We'll talk about DFS, which we know there's much interest in. And then we'll ask you all to, like we said, to thought partner with us in breakouts around juveniles and adults. And hopefully, and our goal is to be solution oriented and to really leave here with a set of ideas around what we can be doing differently so that we can improve public safety. And by that, we'll be very specific, reduce crime in our city. And so we thank you for being here. One of the things that's really important to us is we'll talk about data, but we serve people. The mayor reminds us often that we're local government, and that means that we're here to serve our residents and visitors. And that means rooting ourselves in community. And so it's always important, Chief Conte often says to us that you need to listen to the voices closest to the pain. And so to do that, we're going to begin by getting a briefing on Ward 8, because we know that while everyone in our city is affected, that there are some who unfortunately feel the effects of crime and public safety in a different way. And so before we do that, we're going to turn to the mayor to open us up.
Well, good morning and welcome, everybody. I would like you to adjust this agenda by 30 minutes. We're not actually late. We're starting at 9:30, so just adjust what's behind us by 9:30, which would put us at a closing at between 12:30 and 12:50. But I want to thank Deputy Mayor Appiah, the entire Public Safety and Justice Cluster, and I know all of our Public Safety and Justice Cluster directors are represented here. I hope that you will have the opportunity to talk to them, to ask questions of them throughout our discussion and as we go into breakout sessions. I also want to recognize the members of the council who are here as well. Councilmember Trayon White from Ward 8, Councilmember Charles Allen from Ward 6, Councilmember Brianna Doe from Ward 1, Councilmember Matt Fruman from Ward 3, and Councilmember Anita Bonds at large, Councilmember Christina Henderson at large. So we thank you for taking the time to be with us today and for being constructive partners in what we need to do throughout our city and throughout our system to ensure safety for our residents. Lindsay got it exactly right when she said what I charged our agency with was introspection, critical introspection about what is working and what is not working and what needs to change. And to think about the 1, 2, 3, or 10 things that if we change would make a child safer, a neighborhood safer, and collectively our community safer. And obviously, there are many parts of our ecosystem in the district. And I have also asked everybody to do the same thing. Introspection, think critically about what we're doing, and think about the 1, 2, 3 things that we can change within our own operations and that we can recommend to change throughout the system. So this is our charge today, our purpose. We've set aside a half day of our ecosystem partners, also representatives of our corridors and communities who are also here and who will participate in our breakout. So I want to thank you all. I look forward to listening and learning and to making the necessary changes that will make our communities safer. In the breakout, in the panel discussion that we're going to have a little bit later, moderated by Tom Sherwood, we're going to hear from the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, Matt Graves. We'll hear from our Attorney General for the District of Columbia, Brian Schwab, and we'll also hear from the Chief Judge for the D.C. Superior Court, Judge Anita Josie Herring, along with the Council's Chair for Public Safety and Justice, Brooke Prento. So we look forward to everybody's ideas, challenges, questions, and because in some way each of us is doing this work, we know that the solutions, many of the solutions are in this room. Thank you very much. So if you don't mind, Deputy Mayor, I'll introduce our next panel, our next speaker, I should say. And I asked the Deputy Mayor to have just an overview of what we see as an example in one of the district's 8 wards. And unfortunately, I think many of us know and hear about crime, but it may not be impacting us directly. And I know that the district is as strong as its most vulnerable residents. And so I asked Wendy Glenn, who is my representative in Ward 8 from the Mayor's Office of Community Relations and Services, and who works with MPD closely, works with community organizations closely, just to give an overview from the perspective of someone who lives in Ward 8 of what's going on with crime. And then I know the chief and team will further talk about all of the district's 8 wards in our crime briefing. Wendy.
Good morning, everyone. So a little bit about myself. I am Wendy Glenn. As the mayor has said, I am the Ward 8 Moker, but I'm a parent and I'm a grandparent. And I live in Ward 8, and I've lived in Ward 8 20 years. So I live on 2nd and Mississippi. I'm surrounded by schools. Baloo is my neighbor. Simon is across the street from me, and Hart is down the street from me. So I wanted to give some insight into what a parent like myself sees and the calls that I receive as a Ward 8 Moker. So we did some slides, but I wanted, data is great, but hearing from, a voice of someone who actually hears from the voices in Ward 8, I thought would be more effective. So as the slides come up, I will let you know what we see in Ward 8. So if you look at Ward 8, down at the bottom of the mapping, you'll see that it's hot. But we're a hot ward, but we don't want to be hot in this way. So the hot in this way, and I mean no disrespect, that's a very troubling thing that we deal with every day. Every day you have to wonder, is my metro safe? Am I crossing the street safely? Am I going to be entering my home, picking my kids up from school, taking them to a rec center, picking them up from a library safely? So that's where we are in Ward 8. Those are the questions we deal with every day. As you can see, there's not a space or a place that's not hot in Ward 8 right now. Crime is up everywhere in Ward 8, and we really want people to understand what we deal with every day, the trauma that we have to go through every day. And we want people to understand that we're a great ward, and crime is something that the mayor is focused on, the council members focus on, and the council is focused on. But we as a community, we focus on it every day, 24 hours of the day. If you look at this slide right here that says violent crime by ANC, I want to really recognize my Ward 8 ANCs, because when I get the calls for homicide, I call them, no matter the hour, and they get up and they come and they ask questions and they engage. But those numbers are staggering. Behind those numbers are people. They are people that actually have to deal with this every day. Now we have crime by the hour. Now this is the part that hurts me the most, because I am a grandmother and I'm a mom. So when I look and see that crime goes up at the same time that children are released from school, that children are on their way to a rec center, a library, or on their way home after school, that's an issue for me as a parent. That's an issue for me as a grandparent. That's an issue for me that other folks in our ward call me about every day. Is there a shooting down the street from my school? This happened in broad daylight. What is going on? I came out, my car was riddled with bullets. I need to go pick my child up because of this, that, and the other thing. But I want to commend 3 entities that I spoke about. There are safe spaces. The library is a safe space, but you got to get there. The rec center is a safe space, but you got to get there safely and leave there safely. Our schools are the safest spaces, but you got to get there and you got to leave safely. And that's where I think the focus that parents and grandparents, and I want to speak to grandparents are now raising grandchildren of this era. They don't know about drill music. They don't know that they should be looking on, Instagram. That's something that they're not familiar with. So we look to our law enforcement agencies, and they're great in Ward 8, and we look to, other resources, other partners to be with our grandparents that are raising these children. So I wanted to let you see the data, but hear what the concerns are. This was the most staggering, the violent crime map. I don't see a warm space, and that's a problem. That's a problem for the parents, the grandparents, the legal guardians, the young people who are doing the right thing and just want to just live and be successful. So we have to come together to do a little bit more than what we're doing right now. Next slide. That's it. So while I can speak to what parents want and call us about and grandparents, my council member is here. So I don't want to put him on the spot, but I want to kind of put him on the spot so he can speak to the ward and what calls he receives every day. This is not my wheelhouse, but it is his. So I wanted to give this to Councilmember White.
I told Wendy not to do that. But anybody knows Wendy knows she's going to do what she want to do, how she want to do it. And we deal with the aftermath later. But good morning, everyone. I want to thank Mayor Muriel Bowser for hosting this forum. I think it's long overdue. As a leader here in the city, more particularly here in Ward 8, I think that we are faced with a number of challenges and have been for over 30 years. I'm excited that we brought together a lot of community partners to try to figure this thing out, because quite frankly, we had a critical mass when it comes to violent crimes in D.C. And one thing I've learned just as a leader is that it's like a disease, right? If you don't treat it, if you don't figure out where the causes are, if you don't figure the cure, it spreads. And we've seen now that violent crime is not just in Ward 7 or 8, but it's across the city. And I think that we have to find a solution, not point the finger, but collaboratively come together as a community to figure this thing out. And I think we've done a number of things over the years, but we have to do more. I always say that bad things happen when good people do nothing. And I know there's a lot of good people in our communities that want to do something and trying to do something, but we have not done anything collectively together. And so I want to thank my council members who've joined us here today as well. We've also been joined by Ward 5 Councilmember Zachary Parker, who wasn't mentioned. Thank you for coming. And some of our community leaders. I want to thank Linda Holly Hopper. One of the things you may not know is that I believe in a public health approach to addressing violent crime. And when I walked up this morning, I saw some young men in the hallway who are in suits. But what you may not know is they're some of the most at-risk or high-risk or at potential, as you say, individuals in our city, and that's through the Pathways program. And I think that the Pathways program is the beginning of something we haven't done in the city in a long time. And I think we have to get back to our roots. For those who don't know much about me, I've done violence interruption in the city for 6 years straight, and the crime went down. And it was spearheaded then by Mayor Fenty, Jim Graham, Marion Barry, Vincent Gray. But as you know, when things start getting good, the resources get taken away. And when the resources are taken away, you know what happened? It went right back up. And so I've been deeply disturbed. I see the data and the map, but I go to these crime scenes, Chief. You know, we've been there, and our commanders know I've been there. And the last one I can remember vividly that really struck me was I went to a crime scene on the 2300 block of Savannah Street, and I didn't know all of what happened. I responded later to know that there was 103 rounds of shell casings on the ground. These are communities, Warday is home to communities of grandparents, mothers and fathers, but most importantly, more kids than anywhere in Washington, D.C. Well, somebody think it's okay to leave 103 shell casings on the ground shooting at somebody. Then I later read, I guess 3 days later in the Washington Post, that one of the guys who was shot was an innocent person from Africa who was doing Uber for his family and was working Uber, and he was a teacher in Maryland. I say all that to say that we have to figure this thing out now or later, because we can imagine what's been happening in the winter, in the fall. We can imagine what's going to happen in the summertime. We don't get this thing right. And it's not, I don't believe that the police is the end-all solution to addressing crime in our community. I think that all agencies, grandmothers, partners, organizations have to step up and step in and chip in. I think that we've gone down that road a little bit, but we got to dig a little bit deeper. And to me, it's like now or never. Because why somebody's baby right now, it could be your baby next. And I've never seen this onslaught of violence on women and kids ever I've been here in the 90s, we've been the murder capital. I've never seen this. And so I applaud those violence interrupters, those credible messages that go into the trenches every day, but we have to do more. We have to be more aggressive about holding each other accountable, right? On all sides, from government officials to our kids who bringing those guns into our homes. That's somebody's nephew, that's somebody's daughter, that's somebody's son, that's somebody's relative. They staying somewhere. And the housing issue in our city is contributing to the crime in our community. I just got to say it. We are in a housing crisis. And most people we encounter, as Irk Weaver know over there, that most of these young people are homeless. And when they're homeless, they feel helpless. And when they can't eat, they'll take from your plate and eat from you. And so I'm committed to making sure we have a DC that's viable and livable for all people. But I also know that we can't point the finger any longer because we're running out of time at the expense of people's lives. We had over 1,700 people shot in DC in the last 3 years. 1,700. So you do the math. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? You don't get this thing right. That's my time. I didn't expect to speak this morning, but I'm happy to be here to partner with you all to figure out what are the solutions. Because the solutions are in this room and in our communities. I look forward to the dialogue and figuring out a way that I can be helpful and add value to this conversation. Thank you, Mayor Muriel Bowser, and God bless.
Good morning, everyone. We're about to give you really kind of an inside glimpse into a process that the Metropolitan Police Department undergoes weekly with respect to our crime briefing. I got to admit, being a little apprehensive initially about having a very public discussion about this, because this is normally something that happens in police headquarters, where we're talking about crime strategies and we're talking about our partnerships with some of our partners that are in the room. But we're going to go through it and kind of give you an inside glimpse of what we talk about every day. And we selected a specific period. I'm going to briefly touch on some numbers just to kind of give you a broad overview before the team comes up and we really start to get into it. But as Councilmember White talked about and Wendy talked about, and you've certainly heard me talk about this before, we can talk about numbers and what they are. Right now, homicides up 9%. We got 6 more than we did the previous year. That really doesn't mean a whole lot if those were one of your children or your wife or your husband, right? 1 is an unacceptable number for me, 2 is an unacceptable number for me. So, I get it, right? Oh, the number. But I've been doing this for a long time. And there are people behind every single number up on this screen. So I want to talk about some of these numbers as we go through. The homicide number, we talked about 6 more cases than we did the previous year. We have the sexual abuse cases, 51%. That may be staggering to some people, but let me put it to you in its proper context. The majority of those cases, which is still pretty sad to me, the majority of those cases are domestic cases, cases involving children where the abuser is known to the child, brief encounters in some instances. Of those cases, there are really only 4 stranger cases out of all the sexual abuse cases that we have. So that tells you that there are problems in homes, problems with people who would do something to violate the rights of somebody, to violate the body of somebody that they know and love in many cases. Councilmember White talked about the shootings that we've had, the ADW number, the assault with a dangerous weapon, they're up 2%, but those are not all shootings. A large majority of those cases are domestic violence cases, again, issues that we see in homes. We just had a very unfortunate case recently at one of our postal facilities, but people who know each other, who are in trauma and trouble and having all kinds of life experiences, and those numbers, they show up. So again, a lot of people and stories behind these numbers. We'll talk a little bit about the robberies. You see the robberies are up 13%. We'll go into that a little bit as we talk about it. We have some of our federal partners here, but we'll talk about what we're seeing, the trends that we see. The cases that don't show up necessarily in front of the U.S. Attorney or before our Office of Attorney General, but what community members experience every day, those cases that they call Wendy Glenn about, those cases that they call the council members about, to say, hey, this happened in my community. We'll talk about those. Some of the other cases there, the motor vehicle theft, you see that staggering number of 111%. Yes, it is a national trend that's happening in that space, but again, you don't care about the national trend if it's your car that's stolen, you come out the door and you can't get your kids to school in the morning. The national trend being what's happening with Hyundais and Kias. More than half of those cases that we're seeing of the motor vehicle thefts are Hyundais and Kias that have been stolen, and as most of you in the room know, there's a defect with the vehicles. In response to that, the companies have sent us these anti-theft devices, which we've passed out over 2,000 of them to community members. We'll get into some of the other categories, the theft from autos, again, kind of closely related, but also something that's very preventable. And then thefts, really, those are what we see that show up in our area retail stores and CVS's, Walgreens, whatever else we have, Target, a lot of other cases that show up just in some of our retail establishments, even our mom and pop stores. So we'll go through these, but these are what the current numbers are. Next slide, please. So the violent crime trends and property trends, and we talk about this slide, and I'll just really kind of briefly touch on it. If you look at the total number of violent crime cases, this really kind of gives you an idea of where we were back in 2015, which is the number to the far left of the screen, and then where we ended in 2022, just kind of each subsequent year. So again, while we talk about this, and again, we can say, oh, well, the number is down. It's about how people feel, the people who we deal with, the people who we encounter each and every day. I'm sure in 2015, where we had over 6,000 violent crimes, which is showing here, versus 2022, where we were down by more than 2,000, that's not something that people necessarily feel. So again, it's very important that we talk about how we focus on these things. And then the same thing for property crime. You see the difference between 2015 and 2022. Next slide, please. Now, looking at gun-involved crimes and homicides, this is one of the stats really that really stands out for me, something that I watch daily, as I do with most of this. But if you look at 2022, where we ended, and you go back to 2015, you'll see that we ended 2022 with 203 homicides. But you look at the number of crimes where guns are involved, the number of homicides where guns are involved, that's the majority of the cases that we see. It's a firearm that's being involved in our homicide cases, more likely than not. Next slide, please. Another comparison, this is just the getting to what Councilmember one of the things that he was talking about, and we're looking to this really up until May 4th, but total number of gunshot victims, and you see 2020, 245, 2021, 241, et cetera, up to 2023 where we are now. So, back in 2020, as we started to see the uptick in Glock switches and personally made firearms showing up on the streets of the District of Columbia, as Councilmember White mentioned, there are communities sometimes that may experience 103 shell casings that may show up on their scene. More likelihood that more people in a larger setting, in a setting where people may be hanging out, more people can be shot, obviously up in the ante in terms of innocent people who might be shot as a result of that. So those are the numbers there that we've seen. Go ahead, next slide, please. All right, so when we talk about firearms being at the root of all of this, let's look at the firearms that have been recovered by the Metropolitan Police Department. That data is consistent with what we've seen in the community in terms of number of crimes involving firearms. So if you look at 2022, a record year, 3,152 illegal firearms taken off of the streets of the District of Columbia, and that number has been increasing every year going back to 2016. That number has primarily just been increasing. So far this year, in the first quarter of the year, we're almost at 1,000 illegal firearms already. So again, firearms being at the root of a lot of the crimes that we see here in the District of Columbia. And then those over there, the privately made firearms, these firearms are firearms that people have constructed themselves. Those pictures over there to the right, commonly referred to as ghost guns. But again, the number of cases that we've seen, the number of Glock switches recovered, nearly double to 66 in 2021, or from 66 in 2021 to last year, 127 Glock switches, which makes semi-automatic firearms fully automatic. We have our representatives from the ATF that are in the room and very good partners with us as well. Next slide, please. All right, and this one, this is really kind of focused on some of the youth violence. You guys have heard me talk about this last year. We lock up a lot of people here in the Metropolitan Police Department in our city, unfortunately, for committing crimes in our city, and we have so for over the last couple of years. But I think we know and we'll all agree that you can't arrest your way out of some of the problems and concerns that we see, which is primarily the reason we are all here today. You look at 2020, when we hit the pandemic, you start to see arrests come down, some policy changes, even within the Metropolitan Police Department, trying not to necessarily introduce our young people into the criminal justice system, trying to find alternative ways to address some of the issues, but our young people were definitely showing up. And then when we started looking at juveniles who were arrested for the first time as a violent offense, 31% of the juveniles that were arrested in 2022, their first offense was a violent crime. And that was very alarming to me. And you guys have certainly heard me talk very publicly about that. But more alarming is the number of juveniles. You look at the number of juveniles with gunshot wounds. Again, non-fatal gunshot wounds. You look back to 2020, 27, a dip in 2021 during the pandemic, coming out of the pandemic, and here we are in 2023, same time, we're at 38, which again, consistent with the gun crime, consistent with people involved in crime, we're seeing that number go up. Next slide, please. Now, this slide here, this just as a reminder to where we are in terms of the number of police officers that we have, again, addressing the increases that we're talking about. The Metropolitan Police Department, that last number over to your far right of your screen over here, current staffing for MPD, 3,348. When I took over in 2021 at the very beginning, you see the number there, at the very end of 2020, it was 3,799. So a significant reduction in the number of people that we have here within our force, which means that we have to be more creative. We have to be more inclusive of engaging other people to fight crime. And Councilmember White hit the nail on the head. Really, it's engaging all parts of our ecosystem. It's engaging all parts of our community. It's engaging all parts of anybody who cares about the District of Columbia to be the safest city that we want it to be. It's really going to take everybody to make sure that we're doing all the things that we can do. So I'm about to bring my team up here. I'm going to take a seat over here. Is there a mic for me, Tomas? We're going to run through our crime briefing like we normally do. So you guys are just kind of spectators in what we do on a weekly basis.
All right, good morning, everybody. I'm Assistant Chief Leslie Parsons. I am in charge of the Investigative Services Bureau for the Metropolitan Police Department. You're going to hear from various members of my team this morning. I'm going to introduce them, and then they're going to give you their piece. We have from our Homicide Branch, Captain Kevin Kentish. From our Violent Crime Suppression Division, Commander Ramey Kyle. Our Criminal Investigations Division Commander, John Haynes. Our District Captain of Investigations for the South is Christopher Dorsey. And then for the North, we have Captain Jeffrey Cobb.
All right, Kevin, let's roll.
Good morning. First case I'm going to talk about is a homicide in the 2000 block of M Street Northeast. This case started when Monday, May 1st at approximately 12:26 hours when 5D officers responded to the 2000 block of M Street in reference to a shooting. When they arrived, they located our decedent in the roadway suffering from a gunshot wound. So in this case, through our investigation, which was reviewing multiple cameras and multiple interviews, we have identified a person of interest that we are continuing to follow up on and investigate.
And that is, go back for 1 second. Go back for 1 second. Okay, all right. And that is, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry, Kevin.
So next case we have is going to be a homicide that happened in the 400 block of Condon Terrace Southeast. So in this case, on Tuesday, May 2nd, 2023, at approximately 7:24 p.m., 7 district officers were in the area on an unrelated call. They heard the sounds of gunshots coming from the block. They responded to the area where they located our decedent and surviving victims, both suffering from gunshot wounds. So in this case, we were able to identify a suspect vehicle, which was subsequently recovered, and we have forensic leads and CCTV footage that we are currently reviewing that will help us in this case.
All right, anything else you need, Kevin, on that one? Are you good?
No, we're good on this one. Last case we have is going to be a homicide which occurred in the 3700 block of Jameson Street Northeast. In this case, on Wednesday, May 3rd, at approximately 11:11 a.m., 5th District officers responded to the 3700 block of Jameson Street Northeast for the report of a shooting. When they arrived, they located adult female. They located our decedent inside of a residential building suffering from apparent gunshot wounds. So in this case, through our investigation, we were able to quickly identify a suspect, which is a 15-year-old juvenile. We have worked with the Office of Attorney General and secured a custody order in that case. So we are currently working with our partners at the United States Marshal Service on apprehending this suspect.
You got Carter has it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, copy that. All right. What else you got?
That's all we have for homicide.
All right, thank you. Hold on 1 second. We're going to first his name, man. Yep. Hold on, the mayor has a question.
Ms. Detective, I noticed that you had 2 5th District homicides.
Yes, ma'am.
And can you just kind of talk to me about what the commanders were seeing in terms of activity in the 5th District and how it relates to these homicides?
Let me have the 5th District Commander come up. Sylvan, come to the microphone, please. And talk to the mayor about your homicides.
Hi, good morning, Mayor Bowser. I'm Sylvan Altieri. I'm the commander for 5D. So these 2 particular homicides don't appear to be related. One actually occurred indoors of the building where it was. The other one was outside. As far as our homicides in the 5th District, I'll talk about it later on as well, but we actually have a reduction. Our homicides are down a pretty good percentage. We've gone from 13 to 10, and out of those, 4 are closed right now. So we haven't seen any connection with that at this time. And thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Ray.
Good morning. On Monday, May 1st, the Violent Crime Impact Team executed a search warrant in the 3300 block of 6th Street Southeast. This was in reference to a domestic violence threats case. Once inside, our investigators, they located a 9mm Sig Sauer handgun. It was housed inside of a rifle conversion kit. That kit allows a pistol to be fired as if it was a shoulder-fired rifle. We also located a large drum magazine.
Recovered those before? Is this kind of the first time for you guys? Or?
Chief, this is the first one I've seen us recover in the city.
Copy.
We also recovered a large capacity drum magazine, as you can see in the picture on the right. It was loaded with 51 rounds of ammunition. Arrested in this case was 47-year-old Travis Wicks. He was papered in D.C. Superior Court for felon in possession of a firearm. However, the U.S. Attorney's Office are working to bring federal charges against him. He is currently held, and he is scheduled to have a preliminary hearing on May 17th.
He's under CISO, so I see. That's accurate? He's under CISO?
Yes, sir, until 2024, and he was under supervision at the time of his arrest.
Okay.
He also has a lengthy criminal history. I just want to note in 2004, he was arrested for murder. He was convicted of manslaughter, sentenced to 16 years, and was just released in 2020. Moving on, also on Monday, May 1st, the Violent Crime Impact Team.
What was the call that brought you to the house to get the firearm?
So the detectives were investigating a domestic violence threats case where he had threatened somebody that he was in a relationship with.
Thank you. Okay. go
So,
ahead.
also on Monday, May 1st, the Violent Crime Impact Team were in the 1900 block of 16th Street Southeast. While they were in the block, they encountered 32-year-old William Snyder, who was concealing a handgun in his waistband. When they went to confront him, Mr. Snyder took off. He fled on foot, ultimately dropped a firearm. That firearm was recovered. It was found to be a Glock 9mm handgun. It was equipped with a high-capacity magazine. He was arrested. His case was papered in D.C. Superior Court, and he was released. He is scheduled to have a preliminary hearing on June 5th. And then lastly,
He doesn't appear to have any criminal history. A lot of times folks have criminal, but this guy doesn't appear to have any significant criminal. He doesn't appear to have any significant criminal history.
no, sir, he had one minor arrest in D.C.
Okay. Got it.
And lastly, our community-focused patrol unit. It consists of 3 squads of mountain bike officers. They've recently been deployed to our violent crime reduction partnership areas as well as our focused patrol areas. When they're deployed, they're visible, they're proactive, but most importantly, they are charged with engaging the community in a meaningful way at every single opportunity they can. And these are just some of the pictures of how they engage the community, especially our youth in the city.
Got it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Carjacker.
Good morning, Chief.
John, good morning.
During this time period, we had 5 carjackings. 3 of those were armed, 2 were unarmed. I'm going to talk about one particular case that occurred in the 2400 block of Wagner Street Southeast. In this case, a 60-year-old male who's a driver for DoorDash was making a delivery. As he was walking back from the residence from making the delivery, he found that somebody was inside his car. He confronted that person assaulted him, and then a second subject who was in this white SUV vehicle you see in the picture, exited out and also began to assault him. They eventually pulled a gun, grabbed his keys, and took his vehicle and then fled in the original vehicle. We immediately put out the internal bolos for both vehicles, looking for them. Later the next morning, we got a call for a gentleman sleeping in somebody's car in their backyard. 7D officers responded to that location, which was in the 3300 block of MLK. When they tried to arouse that person who was, they described as unconscious, but he seemed to be intoxicated or under the influence of something, they found at his feet was a handgun. He was placed under arrest for entering that vehicle unlawfully and for the handgun. They then found right there in close proximity, our carjacked vehicle, the convertible, was parked nearby. Detectives were alerted. Detectives started to investigate, and based on video from the original scene of the carjacking, they were able to match up that this was the individual that indeed did the carjacking. His name is Dennis Vanson. He was arrested and also charged with the carjacking. That case was papered. He is currently held without bond pending his prelim on May 26th.
That's good work. Okay.
And then the second suspect vehicle was actually located later that day as well by the 6th District Patrol officers. They made a stop. The driver of that vehicle did not have a license, but they did alert detectives, and there was a second person in that vehicle who we do believe are also involved with the carjacking. We're currently looking to place charges on them. Just need to do a little more investigative work on that.
I got it.
That's all we got, Chief.
So Leslie, talk to me a little bit about the carjackings. What's the current number, and just kind of what is the trend you guys are seeing with respect to the carjackings and closures, et cetera?
Yeah, no, absolutely, Chief. So when it comes to carjackings, we are up this year. However, our team is working hard. As you know, the carjacking task force receives these cases. We have heavily involvement from our federal partners, and they use every investigative avenue they can. Some of the complications we see are these cases can be tough to close. Suspects conceal their identities, wearing hoods, wearing masks. And our victims, when somebody's robbed or carjacked,
right,
the last thing they're doing is trying to get a look at somebody's face. And that's one of the necessary things we need is a victim ID or a good identity of the suspect. But what I can tell you, Chief, in the last 30 days, our carjacking arrests are up 8%. We have also seen year-to-date an increase in our motor vehicle theft arrest of 38%, and our unauthorized use of a vehicle arrests are up 18% year-to-date. So we are making great strides.
So I think I know the point that you're trying to make, but everybody else might not understand that. What does that mean when you talk about the motor vehicle theft arrest and the UUV arrest being up? What does that mean?
So when we make those arrests, when somebody is arrested for the motor vehicle theft for the UUV, our team is working then to determine their involvement in that carjacking case when that car is carjacked. We may not have enough at that time to charge somebody with the carjacking, but our team is working all the leads we have and working on that suspect to try to put them in the carjacking offense in order to hold them accountable.
So your stolen vehicle arrests are up, and
Yes, sir.
your you said your motor vehicle theft and your UUV
Correct.
cases are up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Copy that. All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Chris.
The first case I talk about is assault with intent to kill. This is actually a closure. This happened on February 25th, and you have video of it. And the top right of your screen, what you'll see is a complainant falling down and a suspect coming up and shooting numerous times at him. The detective did good work on this case. I was able to identify a target. On May 3rd, we executed a search warrant in the 3700 block of J Street. We were able to recover an AK-47 and place a 16-year-old under arrest for assault with intent to kill. This case was papered. He is held, and a preliminary hearing is on May 15th.
Did we charge? How do we charge him? He's 16. How do we charge? Did we charge him?
Yeah, he was charged, and they picked up as a charged adult.
Okay, good. So it's under thank you, USAO. Thank you. Why are we? And you said that this one happened. Okay, no, I got it. You said it happened in February, but we just closed it in May. Got it.
Yes, sir. We
got
just
it.
did.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Good morning, Chief. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Our next case is a ADW gun. This is a contact shooting from Monday the 1st. Happened at 14th and S Street Northwest in our 3rd District. Members in this case were patrolling the area when they heard the sound of gunfire. They canvassed the area. They did locate our adult male complainant was suffering from a gunshot wound to the abdomen, stomach area. He told the officers that he was inside of an establishment when he looked outside and noticed that there were 3 juvenile males that were tampering with his motor scooter, a moped. He went out to confront them, followed them down the block. One of them produced a handgun and shot him in the stomach. They then fled the scene. As you can see on the screen, they were captured by a nearby surveillance camera. We do have these images out to the public, and we are seeking the public's assistance in identifying those suspects.
Anything else you need on that one, Chris? I'm sorry, not Chris. Jeff, anything else you need on that one? Other than the stuff going out to the public, anything else that we need?
No, sir. Just for the public to call us if they recognize our suspects.
Got it.
Next, I'd like to talk about a significant closure for us. This is regarding.
Hold on, the mayor has a question.
How soon or what is the decision about releasing photo images when a crime is committed? That may be a question for you, Chief.
He can answer. Sure,
Yeah,
go ahead.
typically, we try to get images out as quickly as possible, especially to our officers on the street. Most of the time, they know who these folks are. They're engaged with them on a day-to-day basis. In the event that we don't know who our suspects are, we do submit them for a press release. It goes through a review process. If our images are good enough, we will put those out to the public and seek their assistance in identifying and locating them.
And one of the reasons why we do it internally first, Madam Mayor, just as an example. So let's say if internally we release it, and I know who it is, you know who it is, this guy knows who it is, we're able to identify that person. Sometimes when things go out to the community, as an example, you might get 20 different people coming in saying that it's 20 different persons who's the person responsible. And each one of those then leads have to be followed up on to rule out that it is not the person who they said it was. And that takes a case longer time to close oftentimes. So we'd have to disclose all that. Somebody called in and said it was Mike. Somebody called in and said it was John. Someone called in and said it was Joe. We'd have to disclose all that. So we really try to do a really good job of trying to identify as best we can. Sometimes family identifications are good. Like you'll have a mom, as an example, we'll show it to her, that's my son, that's Mikey. And, those IDs are normally pretty good, but we have to try to work through that. All right, thank you.
Okay. Next, we'd like to talk about a significant closure of a robbery spree that we had that started on April the 12th and ran through May 2nd. It included 7 robbery and carjacking offenses that occurred in our 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th districts.
We were quickly able to get CCTV images of our suspect in these cases and realized that we were looking for the same suspect in each of the cases. We started working with our regional and our federal partners. We soon realized that he was also involved in a number of crimes around the metropolitan area.
Which federal partners are you working with on that?
We work very closely with our FBI partners, ATF. We have a very close relationship with Prince George's County Police, Montgomery County Police.
Okay, got it.
We started working with them. We did recover a vehicle that was used in one of the robberies here in D.C. The forensic evidence that we yielded from that vehicle did turn us on to a suspect, a 35-year-old Shamel Joyner. We then learned that he was identified in some PG County cases as well. So we started working with our FBI partners, PG County Police, to surveil a couple of residences within the 7th District that we knew he would frequent. And on May 2nd, we did observe him leaving one of those residences headed to a vehicle. In plain view inside that vehicle was a large amount of cash and a firearm. We detained him, conducted a search warrant at one of those residences, and recovered some clothing that he's wearing in the images that we got from our robbery scenes. So with the assistance of our FBI partners, he has been charged in the U.S. District Court with those robberies. He's also looking at additional federal firearms and Hobbs Act violations, and he is currently held.
What was this? I'm looking at the criminal history up here. What do you have, or anything that stood out for you in any of the cases?
Yes, sir. I guess the most compelling one is the distribution of cocaine in 2017. He did serve a little bit of time for that. He's also got some unauthorized entry of motor vehicle, theft, destruction of property type offenses.
Property crimes and drugs, pretty
Yes,
much.
sir.
But
No
no
supervision.
violent offense. No violent offenses that.
No, sir.
That he had? Okay, copy.
Next is another significant closure. This one involves a 12-year-old male. This series of robberies included 11 armed carjackings and robbery offenses that occurred within our 1st, 6th, and 7th districts. They all happened between March 21st and April 29th. They involved a number of suspects, at least one of whom was armed with a handgun. We initially developed him as a person of interest following an armed carjacking in the 1st district on April 17th. We recovered that vehicle, and the detectives were able to backtrack where the suspects got out of the vehicle in the building that they went into. So the detectives did great work in that case. They got a search warrant for that residence. We were then able to identify who our suspect was. He was arrested later that evening by our 7th District patrol officers. He wasn't at the residence at the time. We did catch him later. We are looking for additional suspects, but he has been papered in all of those cases and is currently held.
Oh, okay, that's excellent. I don't know, Mayor, you have any questions about that? Okay, all right, got it. Thank you. Chris?
So, Chief, this is going to be an assault with intent to rob in the 100 block of L Street Southeast. This case is going to capture on video. What you see is a complainant who's a cab driver. Suspect comes behind him, produces a gun, demands his money. Pretty much he said, I don't have any money. They start fighting. The complainant eventually falls to the ground. The complainant then chases the suspect away, and he's last seen going on 2nd Street. We did get video surveillance from nearby areas. We did have pushed a bolo out in reference to a black Hyundai SUV. We're still trying to find additional video from where the suspect fled before and after, so we get a little bit better images pushed out there.
So the complainant chased away the suspect. He didn't get the car.
He did not get anything from the complainant.
Okay, got it.
All right, and the last case that we have for you actually occurred on Tuesday the 2nd, just after midnight at a 7-Eleven in the 1700 block of 17th Street, Northwest in our 3rd district. As you'll see here on the video, our adult male suspect enters the 7-Eleven. He confronts the clerk with some type of a long gun. He then demands the cash from the register. The clerk actually takes the entire tray out of the register and hands it to the suspect. He flees the scene with it. Our officers were able to recover that. They also recovered the gray hoodie that he's seen wearing there in the footage. We did take these images and also put those out to the public, as you can see there on the right. So we are looking for the public's assistance in identifying him. And of note, I'd just like to point out that we have reviewed this. This is not one and the same with Shamel Joyner that I talked about earlier.
So how much did he get a large amount of money from the location, or?
No, sir. There was $250 inside the cash register at the time.
We're talking to 7-Eleven about their drops and all that good stuff.
Yes, sir. We've been in communications with them. We actually have a really good relationship with asset protection for 7-Eleven that we communicate with on a daily basis.
Got it. All right. Copy. Thank you.
Sir.
All right, so we're going to transition over to our patrol section. Thank you, detectives. We're going to transition over to patrol. We could be here for a while if we went through all 7 districts, but I'm going to do a district in the north and a district in the south. So we're going to start with Chief Kane for the north, and 5D, we're going to hear from them, and then we'll transition to Chief Wright, and we'll hear from 6D. We'll do those 2 districts, and that should put us close to time.
Good morning, Madam Mayor. Good morning, Chief.
Good morning.
Kane, Patrol Services North, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th District. Over the last May 1st through May 4th, the Patrol Services North District, we experienced 2 homicides. 1 is closed, 1 ADW, 15 robberies, 2 should be closed, 2 carjackings, 7 guns recovered, and 4 arrests. With me, I have my command staff from Patrol Services North. I have
Come on
the
up,
2nd
team.
District
Come on up.
Commander,
Come
come
up.
on over, Commander Branch, Commander Boatler of the 3rd District, Commander Herald of the 4th District with Inspector Karen with him, and Commander Sylvan Altieri. Altieri is going to present and represent Patrol Services North. What he experienced during the reporting period was 2 of those homicides fell within his district, a carjacking, 4 robberies, and 3 of the gun recoveries, 3 of the 7 gun recoveries were out of the 5th District. It's important to note that all of the commanders use all of the tools that they have in their toolbox at crime prevention, crime strategy, working with the community, and Sylvan will actually demonstrate that for you today.
All right, got it. Sylvan, good morning.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Yep.
My name is Sylvan Altieri. I work at the 5th District for the Metropolitan Police Department. I'm here to talk today about what's been happening within 5D. It's important, I think it's been recognized by the chief, by the mayor, by the deputy mayor. When we talk about these stats, we're talking about people, and these are not numbers. And to me, in the district I work, the numbers are this. You know, these numbers represent someone who's experienced trauma and someone who's experienced loss, and in some cases both. So no matter if the numbers are good or bad, it's still, we have to take into account that people are being affected. Mostly everything we had was briefed out on already by the CID unit, so I'm going to just touch on the crime statistics we have right now. So going to 5D, our numbers are down. We have a reduction in homicide. We're down by 10, and we're down 10. Our sex abuse cases are down. Our ADWs are down. Our robberies have spiked. So our violent crimes at a 10%. Out of those, we've already discussed the homicides. 4 of those have been closed already. The sex abuse cases, the chief talked earlier about stranger cases. All of our cases are known suspects or brief encounter, and there's still 2 of those are closed. The rest are still being investigated. Our ADWs have dropped significantly, which is great. I wish it would be lower. Like the chief says, 1 is too many. Our robberies what really hurt us this month. We had a spike in robberies, and really what that was attributed to that spike was 2 things. 1, when you look at robberies, you have to look at pattern robberies. There might be a certain target demographic that robbers are looking for. There might be a certain place or a certain area, and you also have to look at clusters. So out of those 2 areas, what's happened is we had 6 robberies pretty quick back-to-back in the Trinidad area of construction workers. And the reason this is, and we've seen it citywide, I think every district's been affected, but what's happening is people are coming here to find a better life, to find better employment, and they're working hard to do that. What's happening is a lot of those folks that are here, if they're undocumented, they operate under the false assumption they can get bank accounts. So a lot of times they deal in cash, and a lot of times they have a lot of cash on them. Several years ago, the people who are robbing people figured this out, and they're sort of targeting folks like that. Now, if it's a construction area, if it's a major company, it's great. We've partnered with them, we've spoken to them, we've really gotten into the weeds, and they've really been helpful as far as letting us educate their employees. The problem that happened in Trinidad is it was not a major construction company. These are people that are framing a door. They're putting a deck in. They're doing small work. And what's happening is criminals are going out and kind of looking for these vehicles, and they're targeting Latinx workers right now because in their minds, those are the folks that are going to have the money on them because they're assuming, incorrectly many times, those are the people that are undocumented. So to get behind that, we've reached out to the Department of Migrant Services, working with the Latina Liaison. We're really trying to push out more information because if we can educate the folks who are being targeted as far as what they can and can't do with their money, it's going to help them if they do get robbed not take such a huge financial loss. Either way, it's traumatic, and either way, we don't want the robbery to happen, but we don't want somebody's livelihood being taken because of this. I would ask, since the media is here, if they could probably put something like that out, it would be great too to help educate the community further. The other robberies we had this time were the spree robberies. Now, the difference between a pattern and a cluster robbery and a spree robberies, sprees are something that occur back to back to back in rapid succession. We had 6 of those in 60 in April, all involved juveniles. Fortunately, Commander Herod's 4th District was on top of it, and they arrested several of those folks. So that's been helpful. But even with that, if you look at those particular folks committing the offenses, some of them were linked to like 11 offenses at one time. So that's really something that's taken a hit out of us. But we are going to continue to do our best with the robberies, working together and sharing information. We think that's been helpful. I think what's got our crime down where it is we really focus on things like clusters, when things are happening, or the areas things are occurring. Can you go back one slide? I'm sorry. But if you go back here, if you look, what's our driving right now is motor vehicle thefts like everywhere, correct? I mean, that's the big thing. Now, if you look at our motor vehicle thefts, we had that going down because our main target area for people doing this was in the NOMA area, the NOMA business area. We got together with a bid there. We put out a lot of education stuff to the community, and we really started to get it to go down because what was happening there were hop-ins. People were leaving their cars running, and some of you have probably done it. I know my wife's done it. But people are guilty thinking if their car's running and they have the fob, you can't drive the car. That's not true. On most foreign domestic models, you can. So once we looked at that, adjusted our deployment, put people down there, it started to kind of move that out of the area. But immediately when that happened is when the Hyundai Kia Challenge began. 222 of those motor vehicle thefts are all attributed to Hyundai Kia Challenge. So we would actually be doing better on that. The other thing we have to concentrate on too, as well as people's safety, is keeping businesses in the city, right? So retail theft is a problem in 5D. Our things right now for our theft is up 25%. We have 3 main retailers that are doing it, that are being targeted. All of them have been cooperative with us. We've been working with them hand in hand to try to find different ways to reduce this impact because people in DC need a place to work and they need a place to shop, and it should be in the city. And part of the thing is up to us to make sure we as an agency are trying to keep that going. I'm sorry, can you go next slide? And then the last one. And what we really like to do at 5D is community engagement. We have to engage the community. We have to partner with the community. We have events every day, sometimes as small as Fitness for Seniors, sometimes with larger events like this. So Captain Small, he's my captain in Sector 2. He went out and met with Walgreens that just came in up in Maryland Avenue. Again, talking to them about loss prevention, trying to get ahead of it, explaining things they can do and how we can assist them and they can assist us. And the other event, which I think is great, that Chief Kane and Captain Small did together was Home Depot. That is one of our flagship stores in the city. We have to keep Home Depot. Now, that was a twofold situation. One, Home Depot has a high amount of retail theft. But 2, Home Depot also has people that are day laborers in the parking lot that are looking for jobs. Again, people just trying to make a living who need to survive. The problem is you have more people coming in who maybe don't know the system and how that works. You know, there's kind of like an order how we do it and take turns. And because of that situation, we ran into some assaults up there and some robberies and things like that. And we got on that right away. Captain Small did a great job with Chief Kane. We got with Migrant Services, we got with Latino Liaison Unit, we got with the retail store and the management, property management, to really try to figure out a holistic way to just kind of explain to folks, how can we keep you safe when you're here looking for work, and how can we keep any violence down, and also how can we keep the retail theft unrelated to that at Home Depot down. So that's where we are, and that's where we're looking at right now, Chief. We have 100 gun recoveries right now. 41 of those are from CST. I think they're doing a great job with the expansion. And I have any questions, I'm free.
So in your assaults and robberies, are you talking about between the day laborers, or are you talking about outside people coming in? Okay.
So with Home Depot specifically, what was happening is the day laborers, we had some new folks coming in. As you know, we have people coming into DC all the time.
Right.
And they didn't really understand the order, so they were kind of cutting the line. And, you know.
I got you. Okay. Fair enough. Madam Mayor, any questions? All right. Okay. Thank you, Sylvan.
Thanks, sir.
All right.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Let's move to the south. Chief Wright. All right, why don't you bring your team up, Dre? Thank you. And then we'll hear from 6D.
Morning.
Good morning,
Madam Mayor. Good morning, boss. I am.
Come over.
Assistant
Hey, team,
Chief
can you guys
Andre
come
Wright.
over so they can see you, please? Thank you.
Come on, beautiful people. Come on.
All right.
All right. We're going to be talking about one homicide, which is open, 4 assaults with dangerous weapons with 1 arrest, 7 robberies with 3 arrests, which is great. 2 carjackings with 1 arrest, 1 burglary while armed, and 14 gun recoveries, which is awesome because we know the amount of guns that are on the street, and the more that we can get off, like the boss said, if we're just getting off 1, we know that that's going to count towards saving a life. Today, specifically, we're going to be talking about the 6th District commanded by Darnell Robinson, but let me introduce my staff. This is Commander Darnell Robinson of the 6th District. His right hand, Inspector Fitzgerald, is not here. Tasha Bryant, commander of the 1st District, and Lachey Maker, who's commander of the 7th District. Today we're going to be focusing on the 6th District. some of the crime-fighting strategies that we employ. And we're also going to talk about the violent crime reduction area, which, if anyone has gone through Good Hope Road and MLK lately, it is phenomenally changed. They've been doing great work. And a lot of that is the whole of government approach that started in the north, and now we have it in the south. So he's going to...
Dre, before he starts, just talk about the wards and neighborhoods that are covered in the south, please, just briefly.
So specifically, you have Washington Highlands when you're talking about 708. You're talking about the Woodland community. You're talking about historic Anacostia, 701. So I'm trying to make sure I get all of the major.
Right. Then go to 6D.
Okay. Then you,
6D,
right.
you got to.
Then when you go to 6D, you have the Anacostia area. You have Darnell, Clay Terrace, Lincoln Heights, Kenilworth Avenue, your old stomping ground.
And then of course, 1D.
1D, you have Chinatown, you have the Southwest
National
Waterfront,
Stadium.
you have Nat Stadium, we have Capitals.
All right,
Capital
got
Center.
it. Just for everybody in the room to know what areas that we're talking about. Okay, got it. So Darnell is going to talk about 6D, Ward 7 primarily, and then you have a little bit of, I guess, a little bit of Ward 8 as well, right? All right, got it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Darnell Robinson. I'm the commander of the 6th District. In regards to our crime, we had 3 ADWs. The first ADW was in the 600 block of Division Avenue. This involves H.D. Woodson students. They appear to be in an argument. After the argument, someone occupies a vehicle, they turn around, and then they fire upon that group. That group returns fire. As of this morning, an arrest has been made in that case with the work of Criminal Investigation Division. So that is good work on their behalf and following up.
Was that custody order or was that a PC arrest? What was that?
It was the custody order, and it's also with the assistance of DC Public School staff and also our SROs.
Okay,
and identifying those who were involved.
That happened this morning?
Absolutely, this
Got
morning.
it. All right, thank you. That's good work.
The next we have assault with deadly weapon, was a knife, domestic violence. There was no injuries. However, the victim, they were in a relationship. She was able to exit the location, made contact with the police or with the witness who called the police. Upon our arrival, we made contact, did an investigation, and arrest was made. The individual that was arrested did not have a criminal history, but I want to note in reference to domestic violence, unfortunately, 54% of domestic violence is in Ward 7 and Ward 8. With that being said, our agency, our Criminal Investigation Division, works closely with DC SAFE and also the U.S. Attorney's Office in providing services for the victims and support as they go through the judicial system, and also provide them resources and programs that they can take advantage of. The next we have the ADW, assault with deadly weapon, and this is pointing. This is more so of threats. This is a mother who was realized that her son is in conflict with the suspect. The suspect produces a gun, makes threats to the mother, and flees. The mother later reports it, identifies the individual, and then when that individual, and Mayor, this is to your point of that image being released, it was released 2 days to the roll call. Officers Connor, Johnson, and Officer Gonzalez recognized the individual in that image. They went to the 3700 block of Minnesota Avenue, identified the person that was in the image, made contact because they knew him, and then they were able to make an arrest. Upon that arrest, search incident to arrest, a gun was also recovered. That 3700 block of Minnesota Avenue has also been identified as our focus patrol areas. That initiative has been pushed out since May 1st in identifying several locations within each district of areas that have more gun violence and also sounds of gunshots too. The carjacking was also briefed out or handled by the Criminal Investigation Division. I want to focus on the 9 gun recoveries. They do a phenomenal job.
Did you have any robberies? 0 robberies? That's I will say normally that don't happen for you, Darnell.
This not would, but
yeah, but for the period. Let me see. Go back to the other one for your numbers. So you guys are up for the year. You're at 162. You had a significant reduction last year, but it looked like you're 30 to 60 days. You're at 34. So they have been doing good the last couple, but for the year you're up. You're up 7%. Okay, all right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
To speak on those robberies,
to
speak on the robberies, we did have 55 in March. That doubled the threshold. The threshold is a number that we used for the year prior to have a forecast of what's expected for the next month. We use that to better gauge. And what you see with the 30 to 60, a quick lesson on what you're reading or what you're seeing and how these numbers are prepared. The first line is 55. That's the numbers that we received in March. The second is in April. We have 34. We have approximately 20 less or 21 less than what we had in the previous month. What that indicates to all commanders is that we are deploying accurately. We are making the necessary adjustments in our deployment and identifying these areas that we need to focus on. And because we have done that, this is how we best gauge our success in doing that deployment. In that deployment, we deploy with purpose and also with intelligence-led policing. With that intelligence-led policing is data-driven. And what I mean by data, we compile all the offenses that occurred that involve gun violence and identify these specific areas. And it's just not the violence that involves guns, meaning robberies. It's also sounds of gunshots that is very disturbing to community members. It is just sounds of gunshots, unfortunately, is a shooting that was just missed, a person that just missed reality. And we focus in these areas and identify those locations, and we deploy our CST units and also our patrol units, in which we've recovered 9 guns.
Darnell, before you get to the guns, let me ask you this though. So when we talk specifically about homicides, you look at the city. Right now we have 76 homicides, right? And 6D, the areas that you have responsibility for accounts for 24 of those homicides, and 7D accounts for 23 of them. So that's the majority of the homicides for the city that are primarily in 2 patrol districts. While you didn't have a bunch for the reporting period for this past week, I mean, what are you seeing with the homicides in 6D with respect to, motive, for example? I know Kevin, are you still in here somewhere? All right, so what are you seeing specifically? You can come up as well with Darnell just in case he needs a hand, but I don't think he does. What are you seeing with motive with respect to the homicides? Again, I mean, you're talking about, 50 or 47 homicides of the 76 again in those 2 districts in Patrol Services South. So talk to me a little bit about the motive and what you guys are seeing. Then you can kind of transition to your gun recoveries. That's impressive, the number. That's a good number for those number of days. But talk to me about your homicides.
All right. 3 of them have been identified as domestic violence in nature. We do have 8 that have been closed with an arrest. The motive, it appears to be spontaneous. As an argument happens, a gun is introduced to the argument, and it's just spontaneous. We have not found a pattern as it relates to neighborhood conflicts, but when we do have homicides in these areas, we hurry up and address, and we hurry up pivot to those locations that we are expecting retaliation.
So that's for 6D because, I mean, not everybody has that same experience. I know in some of the other neighborhoods, like you get a shooting over here and then, it shows up back and forth. But specifically for 6D, for the ones that we've had so far this year, the homicides, you're saying it's more spontaneous, not the back and forth.
Yes.
Okay, copy. Go ahead.
Kevin, if you have anything else.
The one addition I have, to me, I think, is what we're seeing across the district is poor conflict management. People are in conflict, and the introduction of a gun is done. So we have poor conflict management as well as the accessibility to illegal firearms.
Got it. Okay. All right. Darnell, what else you want to add for your 24? Anything else? I'm not pushing you for anything more, man. I'm just asking if you got anything else to add.
Nothing really. I want to just highlight one, which is the 600 block of 46th Place.
Yeah.
This is the Simple City. Areas that have been identified specifically, that area, Officer Emmanuel pulls in the block just to for the sounds of gunshots.
Yeah.
As he's pulling in the block, and you see on the CCTV footage of 2 individuals on the ground. As one gets up, he just finished shooting and killing this individual. As he is getting up, you see the headlights of the cruiser come into the picture screen. Officer Emmanuel exits the vehicle, encounters a brief foot pursuit, an apprehension was made, and also a weapon recovery. I have never met anyone who has made an arrest immediately after a homicide. It's unfortunate that the loss of life, but being able to identify these locations that stem from gun violence and officers paying attention and being deployed and maintaining the integrity of our deployment and being in the areas where they were supposed to be is a good job by Officer Emmanuel in bringing that to closure.
Got it. So let's talk about your gun recoveries and your violence reduction. Let's talk about your gun recoveries again. This is just for the period, the reporting period we're talking about, May 1 through 4. talk about those. I'm interested in if we know the disposition of the case, where we stand since we're a few days removed. And also I want to hear about the violence reduction partnership, because you have some of those areas there in 60. So let's talk about those. Thank you.
Two of those weapon recoveries were 3800 block of Hayes, which is Paradise and Mayfair neighborhood. We had a recent homicide, and due to that, our units deploy with that information, intelligence-led sharing, and providing all officers to know and kind of be on the lookout to be aggressive, and also look out for those in possession of weapons. Two of those arrests were made. One was papered in district court, so that's a good job.
Was it, he's a prior felon or something?
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
got it.
felon in possession.
Yep.
The second one, he was arrested. He was no papered. However, we are still doing the investigations and leading it being revisited to grand jury.
Do you know if it was something that we didn't do, or we just need to make a better case, or do you know the reason for the no paper?
We just need to make a better case, and I think
Okay.
the units are working on that now to revisit that.
Got it. Okay, go ahead.
The other three, the areas that have been identified, the 5 areas in the 6th district as focus patrol areas, 3 apprehensions have been made. I mentioned 3700 block of Minnesota Avenue, which is one of those corridors, and also the Alabama Avenue corridor. 2 arrests have been made with guns, and that's not too far from the homicide that occurred approximately a month ago that we did have the apprehension. The other one that was no papered was an individual, in which we oftentimes is recognizing someone displaying characteristics of armed gunmen, as prior to them encountering or engaging, they flee. As the officers pursue, the individual removes and discards the gun. They apprehend, and then we recover the gun, and a lot of times thus no paper, but it's picked back up after DNA is brought to the table. And in reference to our VCRP,
Yep.
our Violent Crimes Reduction Partnership kind of comes off the heels of our Violent Crime Reduction Partnership comes off the heels of the homicide.
Can you step aside just a little bit, Darnell? Sorry, I'm trying to see your numbers. Okay, gotcha. Go ahead.
No problem. The comes from the Homicide Reduction Partnership of the initiative from the mayor and also the chief in identifying 4 PSAs that were driving the homicide numbers up. Using that same similar tactic, we have brought it to the Good Hope Road corridor. Those boundaries of the Violent Crime Reduction Partnership are W Street, which is in PSA 701, and also R Street, which is in PSA 607. The 18th Street and also down to the Good Hope. So what you're seeing right now on the screen is pretty much what encompasses the Violent Crime Reduction Partnership that is led by Captain Tutt, who is doing a phenomenal job. And as of right now, we have a negative 25% in violence, and this has been initiated since January 26, a negative 25% in violent crime and a negative 26 in property crimes. They do have 2 homicides, unfortunately, that occurred on February 10th. A homicide has 2 persons of interest in relations to those homicides. So that's a good work by them, and kudos to these officers. We are seeing when we work together and bringing everybody to the table and holding people accountable to do their job.
What does that mean, bringing together? I know what it means when you're talking about it, but I don't know if everyone in the room can really appreciate what you're talking about. This really was kind of a build off of the Nightlife Task Force rollout that we did last year, and really looking to take that same thought process, that same crime fighting strategy with respect to the nightlife areas where we saw tremendous reductions, but also to move that into communities that were experiencing issues. And so if you can kind of talk about what that approach looked like specifically in 6D in your VCRP area for everybody else, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes. What we have found by using Department of Behavioral Health, other agencies, DCRA or DBL, the other agencies that, and DC FEMS.
Who else?
DPW.
Major shout out to DPW, FEMS.
Fire EMS, they do a phenomenal job. Mokers. It's a whole group. It's a big group that come around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and we kind of adjust that on a certain day. And also 4D.
How often?
Once a week.
Uh-huh.
And then they also share another day in the 4th District along the Georgia Avenue corridor that has been identified as a Violent Crime Reduction Partnership, which is led by 2 captains.
So what do they do?
After they get together, they address. And what we've learned by walking these corridors, it's not always about crime.
Right.
It's about the quality of life.
Yep.
And seeking assistance with those who are in crisis and providing resources and education to help them along the way. not only do they address those who may not be in compliance, instead of finding them, they help them get in compliance. So it's a technique that we have used, not the arrest our way out, but more so being supportive to the community and giving the needs of the community instead of just the police presence.
Right.
Bring everyone to the table, and it's paid huge dividends along the way with the Homicide Reduction Partnership and the Violent Crime
Who
Reduction
else
Partnership.
participates with us? Because I know it's not just MPD, and I know we've had some of our federal partners that we've engaged in that space as well, that were very instrumental in what happened in the nightlife areas with keeping people out of the area who shouldn't be in the area, keeping them in compliance. So I just want to make sure we recognize them as well.
Yeah, CSOSA does a phenomenal job in identifying those
Got it.
who are being monitored and supervised under their watch.
All right. Got it.
And definitely coming out.
All right, Darnell, thank you. I appreciate it. I think that'll wrap up this portion for MPD.
So hopefully what you saw there is really a glimpse into how MPD works, things that you may see and may not see, but in what you heard, ideas and strategies around how MPD is implementing strategies from hotspot policing, but also partnerships with bids, with other government agencies. And hopefully that helps to spark ideas in all of us about how we can expand this type of work and really work together to get the type of impact that we're getting in nightlife, homicide reduction partnership, violent crime reduction partnership areas across our city. And so we're going to take a break now, and then we'll continue after a 10-minute break to make our way through our ecosystem. So one of the things that we wanted to do is continue to talk about our public safety and justice ecosystem. And we use this phrase a lot, the ecosystem. And one of the reasons we do that is because the definition of an ecosystem is a complex, interconnected system. And certainly ours is one of that. This is our public safety and justice ecosystem. We wanted to see that you've heard from MPD, who falls into our intervention and enforcement category, but you also heard them talk about how we work together across the ecosystem. From prevention, which are non-law enforcement interventions, including violence intervention, our Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants that funds nearly $100 million worth of grants with community-based partners to help us serve victims and to help us prevent crime. We have the accountability. You see our partners in the courts and our prosecutors, and then rehabilitation, which includes our Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, our Mayor's Office of Returning Citizens Affairs. And so we invest all the way around because we believe that in order to increase safety, reduce crime, create conditions that people can thrive, it really does take investment across that. And so we wanted you to see that so that we're talking with the same language. So we're going to keep moving, and we know that there's a lot of questions, and there's been a lot of questions about certain parts of our ecosystem, and one of them is the Department of Forensic Sciences. And so as we're talking about what's working, what isn't, we believe it's important on our side to really talk about these things. And so this is our opportunity to do that. Brandy Kramer, the Chief of Staff for DFS, is going to take us through where we are in our accreditation process. But I also wanted to take a minute to acknowledge Dr. Francisco Diaz, who's our Chief Medical Examiner. He's waving there, and who was just recently appointed our interim director for DFS to help us continue on the path to reaccreditation. We know that the systems that support the ability of MPD and our justice system partners to close cases and to successfully move through prosecution or otherwise are vitally important. And so Brandy's over here comes Brandy, and she's going to talk to us a bit about where we are in accreditation and what we need to continue to move towards the point where we have a highly functioning, high capacity forensic lab.
Okay. As Deputy Mayor said, my name is Brandy Kramer, Chief of Staff of the Department of Forensic Sciences. I would like to thank the Mayor and Deputy Mayor for asking me to speak today about the reaccreditation process at DFS. So back in late summer, early fall, the Department of Forensic Sciences hired an outside consultant called FACT Consulting to assist on rebuilding the Quality Assurance Unit and reaccrediting the Forensic Science Lab. Essentially, what they did was provide guidance on the organizational structure, staffing requirements, go through all of the manuals and documents, and assist in creating partnerships to improve relationships and rebuild the trust with our stakeholders. They came up with a phased reaccreditation process, phase 1 being focusing on the forensic biology unit, and then forensic chemistry unit, and then phase 2, we would increase the scope of accreditation. So what I'm going to go over is the project timeline, talk about what it is to engage with our accrediting body, ANAB, and then talk about some opportunities for improvement. So the project timeline, there's a pretty picture, so when it comes up. First and foremost, there's a strategic plan. The consultants met with us and just came up with a plan on how we should tackle this because it's a really big job. So that's where we came up with the phased approach. At that point, we gave the consultants access to all of our documents. Our document management system has over 11,000 documents in it. So it was a very big task for them to go through to determine what we need, what we don't need, and where we can consolidate, because that was one of the recommendations from the S&A audit. So after they finished the document review of just the manuals, they completed a desk audit. And what the desk audit looked at was the standard operating procedures. Essentially, that's everything they do and follow to do the actual lab work. So starting in November, December of last year, they started to actually refine the documents. One of the S&A recommendations was that there were just too many and people didn't know what followed what. Some things contradicted each other, so it was a matter of lumping manuals together, removing items, ensuring that they matched each accrediting body's standards. In March of this year, we started mock casework. So the forensic biology unit and forensic chemistry unit developed plans for having mock casework. What the accrediting body will want to see is a mixture and a variety of cases. So that plan was approved by the consultants that we worked with, and they moved forward starting the last 2 months on mock casework. It should be noted mock casework will continue through the accreditation process because typically people are doing cases within the past year when they reapply for accreditation. Maybe a few weeks ago, I believe, they came in person and watched some of the mock casework being done to ensure that we were following our own standard operating procedures. And to see if anything was deviated from, they needed to note that to figure out, is this another change that we need to make in the process? Last month, we also completed an internal audit. Basically, what this does is look at, it's called ISO standards, and you take every standard and compare it to make sure that the Department of Forensic Sciences has this documented somewhere. This internal audit was completed in April, and it's wrapping up right now at the beginning of May. And this is something that should be done every year, regardless of accreditation. It's an accreditation requirement, which is why we needed to do it. The next step will be a management review. We hope to wait until a new quality manager is on board in June. The management review, again, is something that should be done every year as an accrediting body requirement. And then we will have an external assessment either end of May or early June. And what the external assessment is the FACT team will be coming in and acting as if they are ANAB, our accrediting body. And they will be able to say, here are the recommendations that I have, and then we will address those recommendations. The goal is to communicate with ANAB in June of this year to talk to them about where we are, their thoughts, and what the process looks like going forward. So for ANAB, what we would do is get a quote, and then we need to submit an application. Essentially, an application is a packet of many things. They look at your organizational chart, they look at your position descriptions, they look at the scope of the accreditation, and for us it'll be forensic chemistry and forensic biology. It'll be what instruments we're using. And then they complete almost the same exact steps that FACT Consulting has been doing with us. So they do a document review, an on-site assessment, a resolution of nonconformities, then they make the accreditation decision, and then it becomes conformance monitoring and reassessment. So there's some opportunities to support accreditation. As we've worked through this process, I've served as project manager for this contract, and we've been able to evaluate the agency as a whole. And in order to understand what what that means, we need to know what each of the 3 divisions do. So we have 3 divisions, which is the Public Health Laboratory, we have the Crime Scene Sciences Division, and the Forensic Science Laboratory. So the Forensic Science Laboratory is responsible for the testing of evidence, obviously to assist in the identification, apprehension, and subsequent closure of cases. So the Public Health Laboratory, they essentially are looking at human species. They diagnose, prevent, or look at it for treatment purposes that are certified by the Department of Health and Human Services. They operate pretty independently. The accrediting body for the Forensic Science Lab is ANAB, and then the accrediting body for the Public Health Lab is CLIA. This is a Clinical Laboratory Improvement Amendment. And I bring this up because it's important. As we've worked through the documents for this reaccreditation process, this has caused some issues. For example, in the Public Health Laboratory, in their most recent audit finding, there was documentation for a quality corrective action report. There was a requirement to have 3 days, 10 days, 14 days. That was for the forensic side. Now, the Public Health Lab got a finding because they weren't following that. However, it did not have to do with their standards. So that's one of the things that we find. As we're redoing these documents, another thing is we have to understand what supersedes what when we're dealing with the different accrediting body standards. There's other things that have come up, such as I've been with DFS since 2020, so I was there through COVID and monkeypox. We want to ensure to enhance communication and streamline the process and the chain of command during public health emergencies. You know, this has to deal with directly with grant funding, this has to deal with testing protocols, who makes those decisions, and most importantly, resource allocation to include personnel and supplies. Looking at the Crime Scene Sciences Division, they are not accredited. Historically, they have not been accredited. Crime scene is not typically a core function of the Forensic Sciences Laboratory. They are responsible for testing, and we want to get the lab back to focusing on testing evidence. So if there's a separate infrastructure that allows the laboratory to following, okay, one second. Okay. The Crime Scene Science Division separates the infrastructure to allow the laboratory to follow accrediting body standards and streamline the chain of custody. This way, the forensic laboratory will just be handling evidence that is tested. Okay, so I'll turn this back over to Deputy Mayor.
So as you can tell, it's an extremely technical process, which we'll provide you with documentation and flow charts. We wanted to give an overview, but we want to make sure that as we're talking about our ecosystem, we're addressing all parts where there's challenges. And so there'll be opportunity for us to talk even more about opportunities to make sure that we are moving forward in that space. And so we want to now continue to move through the ecosystem, and we are going to have a panel now where we will invite U.S. Attorney Matt Graves, Chief Judge Josie Herring, our Attorney General Brian Schwalb, and Councilmember Brooke Pinto to join us. Oh, I'm sorry, and he who needs no introduction. I mean, but this will be facilitated by Tom Sherwood.
Yeah, go ahead. The mics are coming out. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. You're good.
You sure you want to sit next to me?
I'm not sure. Are you in a good mood today?
No, I'm never in a good mood.
All right.
That's correct. Okay, we're late starting, so I'll just skip the pleasantries and go right to the questions. No. I do want to start. Thank you for having all of us, so they don't have to say that. Good morning. Crime prevention, justice, how much policing, what kind of policing, how much court punishment, restorative justice, bottom line, public safety for the public good. Let's set the table. Veteran Washington Post columnist Kobe King wrote, I think this morning, Violence is on a roll in our nation's capital. If there were ever a time to call together all the key players, this is it. Not a time for patting yourself on the back. This is the moment for city leaders to face up to the effect that an out-of-control mayhem is having on all our residents, including families and children and visitors to the city. In other words, the people who are bearing the brunt in fear of crime. So no pressure, panel. You've already been introduced, so I won't do that again. We'll start right with the questions. First question to this unique audience. Raise your hand if you've been a victim of a crime, personally, a victim of a crime. Now raise your hands if you personally know someone who's been a victim of a crime. Now, to the panel, you all have key roles in our justice system: policing, prosecution, sentencing, victim counseling. That's a lot. Any one part of it could take up all of our time. So, to start, please give us a short, a thumbnail, a bullet point, 2-minute summary highlighting just what you do. It's not a budget hearing to praise your work and get more money. So, since you're sitting next to me, I'll start the clock with the Attorney General.
Thank you, Tom.
Is it turned on?
You hear me?
We need more staff to do this.
How about now? Okay. Good morning, everybody. So the Office of Attorney General, #1 mission is making people's lives in the District of Columbia better, healthier, and safer. That's what we are trying to do. One way we do that is by being the prosecutor for juvenile justice issues, and I know that today we're going to talk a lot about that role. And it's a role that I think we take very seriously. It's important, and I can promise you that the prosecutors in my office are working very, very hard, closing cases, working regularly with MPD, and trying cases in the Superior Court. But for us, public safety is much greater than simply prosecuting juvenile cases. For us, public safety involves protecting our environment, protecting consumers, protecting seniors, dealing with some of the affordable housing issues we have in our city, as we heard Councilmember White refer to. So much of what we see that resorts in violence starts in our housing, in our deplorable housing. We're fighting against discrimination and hate. We're fighting where we have equity gaps in our city that perpetuate environments that lead themselves to better. Okay. We are also dealing with the fact that we have way too many guns in our city. And wherever the Office of Attorney General can be litigating, fighting, or bringing actions to try to eliminate the number of illegal guns in our city, we are doing that too. And of course, we're advocating for home rule and statehood. And when we talk about comprehensive criminal justice reform in our city, we can't neglect the fact that we are a patchwork of different organizations. We have to work together, but we also have to keep our eyes on the prize that ultimately we should be like every other community in the country that pays taxes, where we have complete control over our entire criminal justice system.
Thank you very much. And Judge Josie Herring, I know at a recent bar judicial conference, you talked about the courts, how you're working hard to eliminate a COVID backlog. In your 2 minutes, how are the courts doing?
I think the courts are doing well. I mean, I think it's important for people.
What? But I want it. Who's going to get fired for the mics?
Can you hear me now? Okay. I said I feel the courts are doing well. I think you have to understand that the courts really sit in a constitutional framework where we have the executive, the legislative body, and the courts that really are there to resolve disputes of individuals in our community, people who live and work in this community, as well as people who do business in the District of Columbia. We're a general jurisdiction court. And so for every legal matter, every subject, domestic violence, family, criminal law, civil, probate and tax cases, you would find yourself in the Superior Court. It's the People's Court. The court works very hard to stay in its lane, to be neutral arbitrators of disputes that come before us. We are reactive, we are not proactive. Our job is not to go out and find cases and search for problems that are happening in the community. Our job is to adjudicate matters before us, and that's what we do. We do have some limitations in the court because, you know, we have limits. We don't take policy positions on legislation or anything like that. It's unethical, but we work hard to resolve the disputes that come before us. We also have a lot of programming that we provide to people because of the conditions that they enter our system in. And so I'm happy to talk with you a little bit about that.
What she meant by some of that is there are some questions I asked that she's not going to answer. Mr. Attorney, U.S. Attorney.
Good morning, everyone.
2 minutes.
2 minutes. All right. I'm Matt Graves. I'm the U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. So the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office is unique among the nation's 94 U.S. Attorney's offices. Every other U.S. Attorney's Office focuses only on violations of federal crime. Earlier in the crime briefing, we heard references to district court and prosecutions in our district court. That's where we prosecute the federal crime. Because of DC's unique status, though, we are also responsible for most prosecutions, almost all prosecutions of adult crime in our superior court, enforcing local law. And it's a weighty responsibility. We do amazing work in our office. We are starting trial this week on an individual who was we allege was part of Al-Qaeda, responsible for trying to carry out a terrorist attack in the wake of 9/11. This is important stuff. But I tell people all the time, there's nothing we do that is more important than our superior court work. It is the work that is most tangible to our fellow community members, and we are deeply invested in that work.
Oh. There you go. It's on.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember. This one is working on this side of the room.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Tom. I'm Brooke Pinto. I'm the Ward 2 council member and the chairwoman of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee on the DC Council. At its core, and speaking for the council, we are in the solutions business. We are about making new laws for the city and ensuring that there is appropriate oversight of the agencies that are implementing those laws in the city. On the Judiciary Committee, the lens through which I view that mission at is really with kind of 5 key functions. The first is around supporting our violence prevention efforts, making sure that we're being creative in some of the strategies we're deploying, including getting to know neighborhood issues, ensuring that there's adequate access to recreational space, and making sure that there's security along the way. Second is around supporting our first responders and our police officers, making sure that we are supporting their efforts and adding strategies to improve their hiring and retention to make sure that they can continue doing their good work. The third is around accountability, and that includes accountability when crimes are committed, and it also includes accountability for things like our Department of Forensic Sciences, which we just talked about, and making sure that we can get to a reaccredited agency. Fourth is around ending cycles of violence and ensuring that we're supporting our victims, and that includes our hospital-based violence intervention work. And lastly is around data sharing. And I think the group on this stage is a good example of this, that we are really all on the same team here, that our mission is to improve public safety. And when we share information with each other, share strategies on what is and not working, we can better help identify those gaps and keep moving forward.
Deputy Mayor?
Sure. I mean, I sit here on behalf of the executive, and so the executive's role and responsibility is to ensure that all of our agencies are meeting their unique missions, but that they're working together in a coordinated, strategic, interagency fashion to serve the district, the residents and visitors of the district. Certainly in the public safety space, that means making our residents safer and investing in programs, services, and supports across our ecosystem.
Stunned. All right, first
You said
question.
2 minutes.
An overall issue important right now. The massive rewrite of the outdated DC criminal code would affect the work of all of you, but it was blocked on Capitol Hill. How important is it for the city to update its criminal code? How quickly? What's next? Ms. Pinto, could you give us a quick summary on where the criminal code is?
Sure. So I think all of us in this room know that the criminal code was disapproved by, the revisions were disapproved by Congress with a very frustrating series of events and a really lack substantively of what went on there, but we're familiar with that process. Where we are now is that I still continue to believe that we need to have a modernized and updated criminal code, and we are grateful for the work of the Criminal Code Reform Commission to help us look through those code modernizations. I also believe that we should do so in a way that is able to get passed and that has the support of our mayor, that has the support of our council colleagues, support of the U.S. Attorney's Office and the Attorney General's Office, and of course the courts don't make a formal opinion, but to do so in a way that is going to be practical and move us forward, because we can't have the current status quo of the code, and I don't want continued disagreements over a small portion of policy matters to undermine the mission of modernizing the code. So I plan to take it up, but it's not immediately as we get through more pressing challenges today.
What is the, if not immediately, what is the timeline? This calendar year, next year, the year after? What's the, give me a timeline that I can hold you to later. Maybe the end of this year?
I would say it's something that we put in the budget to have the commission reconstituted, and I think it is fair to ensure that the mayor is a voting member of that commission, and that work will set to begin in full after October, so sometime after that.
The rest of the panel, is this an urgent matter? Didn't sound too urgent.
I think. Are we down to one? Hello? I think it's an urgent matter. Anytime you've got a code that's out of date, the way our code is, it gets in the way of the efficient administration of justice. Everybody in this room knows that we deter crime by being in a system that works swiftly and efficiently, and people have certainty that the system will result in closing cases. We have an outdated law. It's internally inconsistent. And what the shame of it is that 95% of it we all agreed on. Disagreement is okay. That's the way democracy works. But to be in a place where we had a 95%, which is pretty darn good, not get it passed because our Congress decided it was going to interfere, and candidly to have Congress tell us, and I heard this on the news, I know you all heard it, somebody say, I didn't read the bill, I haven't been briefed on the bill, but I'm against the bill. What kind of democracy are we living in when that's how our laws are being passed that affect us most critically? So I think it is critical, and I think it's an opportunity for us to collaborate and figure out how to take care of our own affairs.
Anybody else? Judge Josie Herring, you're exempt from this question.
Okay, great.
You're on a roll. You want to keep it?
The mayor and the police chief are set to appear next week before the same House committee that blocked the code revision. What thoughts do you have about how the mayor and chief should approach this mostly hostile House committee? And I'll leave it open to the floor. Most of the panels I've done on this, no one says anything. But she's sitting right there, and he's sitting right there.
I don't think there are two better representatives of our city than our mayor and our chief of police to go up to Congress and to articulate the facts and make the case. It will be, by definition, political theater. Some of the questions you will be asked, they're not interested in your answers. They're just interested in asking the question. But I have great confidence that the city will show well next week under a hostile environment.
Any others? I have a few ideas, but we'll move on. We've heard a great deal this morning about the latest crime stats, illegal drugs and guns that scar our communities. Crime is a public health crisis. It's a public safety crisis. How important is it to you to address not only crime itself, but the widespread fear of crime in our city? even as you work on long-term crime prevention like violence interruptions. What do you tell citizens who are fearful right now, who worry that repeat offenders, adult or juvenile, manage to commit more crimes even as we discuss what to do about it? Floor is open. The fear of crime right now.
Thank you. So since this is not a budget hearing, Tom, I won't go into what we did on the committee to support this mission, but I will just share one example of something that I think is a creative way that we need to get resources in now as we continue to build up the pipeline and these longer term investments, which are around safe commercial corridor grants that we can help identify to get these dollars spent flexibly. So this will be for community groups like our business improvement districts, our main streets, other community organizations who can apply to the Deputy Mayor's office for these grants and use them for purposes as they see fit in their commercial corridor. So this could be things like more lighting. This could be things like private security to help patrol and have more eyes on the ground. This could be more rotation of trucks or other things to be helpful late at night to monitor crime. So we're excited about that piece, as well as additional security that we've funded for some of our schools that are open to the public on nights and weekends. We need to make sure that our young people, but our families have access to spaces to recreate and to do so safely. And I hear time and time again that people want to use these spaces, but sometimes they feel fearful to do so. And having security and custodial support in these spaces is going to be really important right now as we try to make sure that these spaces are available and safe for families.
I would say this to our residents and businesses that we hear you and that it matters deeply to us, that we care about you, that you may not see all of the people in this room, but that convenings like this occur because as those who are in positions of leadership in this city, it matters deeply to us that you don't feel safe. It matters deeply to us that you are safe, right? And so we will never state that we have all the answers, but that we believe that working together there are solutions, that working with you, listening to your ANCs, listening to principals, which are convenings that the mayor had at the beginning of the year, coming out to your community meetings and hearing you, and then making investments and adjustments like this, whether it's policy, programmatic, budgetary, in all of our spheres, that we will improve. We will make crime better. We will, because we have to. And so we just want you to, on behalf of everybody here, when I say that we're deeply invested in that, and that your safety matters at a very fundamental level. Technical difficulties happen. We're going to roll with them.
Before anyone else speaks, what would you tell the grandmother who would sit on her porch with her grandchildren playing in the front yard, but she fears the violence in her neighborhood and she doesn't see police officers patrolling?
So one of the things that I would say is that what you heard our Metropolitan Police Department say is that we're in a back to basic moment, and that for any number of reasons that our system has shifted, but we're making adjustments to shift to where we need to be. And that includes, we hear people want to see their officers out of their cars and in community. And so I think it was a week and a half or so ago, the mayor and the chief announced that our focus patrol, we can call it an initiative, but really what they described is a signal to our officers that we want them engaging with community, that it's an extension of what the chief has instituted since he's been there, of making sure that officers are engaging, because we believe that a key part of public safety, that engagement is prevention, right? Like, we don't only want our officers responding to a tremendous amount of calls for service, but we want them engaging. And so through hotspot policing and through what you heard, initiatives across government, the reason we have these task forces, so you know, is presence, right? We talk on our side in the executive about force multipliers, that people want to see their government out, and the mayor's tasked us that every agency needs to be out in community. So that's what I would say.
You can't have a task force in every community, which is what a lot of people would like. Let me ask you, any other thoughts on this, the U.S. Attorney?
So before I was in my current role, I was a career prosecutor in this jurisdiction for a decade. And as a career prosecutor, from my perspective, crime is always a crisis. It's just a question of what is the nature of the crisis today. And, you know, it's been said so well, so much more eloquently by the people we were briefed from by MPD. And I'm so glad you guys got to hear what that looks like and the kinds of conversations we're internally having every day. Because we talk about numbers a lot, and it's important that we talk about numbers, right? Because numbers tell us, as was said earlier, whether our strategies are working, but we really are focused on the human consequence, the grandmother who wants to be able to sit on the porch. That is the end result that is driving us. So what do the numbers tell us about where we are today? It's a really unique crime moment. When I was career prosecuting in the late aughts, we were going through another surge. It was a shooting surge similar to the one that we're having today. At the time, then Chief Lanier famously blockaded one of our neighborhoods, Trinidad, to try to control the shootings that were occurring in that neighborhood. We implemented strategies. We drove down crime. That's why when you looked at that chart that the chief put up and you saw that comparing to where we were a decade ago in a host of crimes, robbery, burglaries, assaults with dangerous weapons even, we're down 50% or more of where we were a decade ago. Despite those strategies, though, because circumstances have changed on the ground, namely the amount of firearms spread, illegal firearms spread in our community, we're seeing way more shootings and carjackings. So we have to adopt our strategies to deal with that, and we are doing that. And you got a glimpse today of how we're doing that. There are a number of investigations that are afoot that we believe will yield results that will drive down the predictive violence that we're seeing.
Well, you raised that issue. The chief has said he needs, or he needs, not wants, he needs more police officers, but he's doing the best he can with what he's got. He says the size of the force is seriously below the numbers he thinks they should have, with too much overtime and burnout. DC Auditor Kathy Patterson is in the midst of a long-range review on how many officers are needed in this city. And since the murder of George Floyd, are we doing enough to better train officers on being part of the communities? Is it more police, better police, or both? Floor?
All right. Definitely both.
Let me say, the mayor, there's been a debate on the council about how many officers, how many you can hire, even if you decide to hire them. The mayor says he hasn't been to a community yet where someone says, we want fewer police. Council members also say it's an important issue that the police be part of the community, not just overseeing the community. So how are we doing on police officers, many of which are sitting right over there?
Sure. So it's definitely both. And I think that we have taken seriously as a city to ensure that we have an accountable police department and that we are equipping our chief with the tools to make sure that that carries forward. The officers who I continue to speak to about this, I think, tend to agree that it is important to have a police department that is accountable and that it has remedies if somebody does violate somebody's human rights or the law, period. We also have to support our hardworking police officers who are doing the right thing, who are the most of you all, who are doing great work for the community and building up the pipeline to get people to join the force. On our committee, we supported every dollar that Chief Conti has asked for additional retention strategies, because we know we have to build up that pipeline so that we can have more of a presence. I also think that it's really important to me, and I know to my colleagues, to make sure that things that we're advocating for right now, to the U.S. Attorney's point, crime is always a crisis. We need to be responsive now, and we need to adopt policies that are going to be sustainable over the long term, that aren't going to be kind of shifting from year to year, because that lack of consistency over time can lead to a lack of safety. We're also continuing, just lastly, to invest in other supports that we know will be helpful to the police, like diversion of certain responses. But we have to make sure that those diversion efforts are built up and supported before we do a complete shift, because the ideas are really strong sometimes, but we need to make sure that they have the support and infrastructure. So some of that's through civilianization, some of that's through automated traffic enforcement, but those conversations and decisions can't happen until the infrastructure and support's in place.
More police, anyone else?
The mayor has maintained that the right number of police is 4,000, but what she has also said is that she listens to the people who do the work. And so if the chief says he needs 4,000 officers, that's what we need. And also she has said, and we believe that we need a policy environment that supports our officers in being best able to do their work. That includes accountability, but it includes accountability across the system.
So more police, please. We are blessed with the finest police department in the country. I'm in awe of what they are able to accomplish in spite of their numbers, all the directions in which they're drawn, right? It's not just keeping our community safe. It's protecting the highest levels of our government, right? Think about all the First Amendment protected activity we have in our community. Each and every time, officers that have just worked shifts are now called to stand in those assemblies as well. It is draining. I don't know how they do it. Let me tell you from my perspective why we need more police officers. We have done amazing, what we call proactive work together over the last few years. This is really going out. We know who is driving gun violence in our communities, the predictive gun violence, not the random disputes that unfortunately escalate. We know. And we have investigations out there trying to hold those individuals accountable right now. Those investigations take time, they take resources. The Chief's Violence Reduction Unit, Commander Kyle, I mean, those are 20, 30 officers that we have going through all the data that we have now. The social media returns, building these amazing cases, but it takes time. It takes about 10 months. That's 20 to 30 officers tied up for 10 months on an incredibly important investigation. If we had a couple hundred more officers, we could be doing multiple investigations at the same time.
Judge?
I would say every aspect of the criminal justice system needs to be well supported. Obviously, there's a proliferation of guns in the District of Columbia coming in from various places, and we have no indication that that's going to stop. And so I think we all have to work together to be creative and pragmatic, realistic about what works and doesn't work in the court system. As I said, we follow the law. Of course, we have some discretion. Sometimes that discretion is specifically described in terms of things we have to consider before we can make a call. I think the district has to decide what policy is good for the citizens of the District of Columbia who are bearing the brunt of all of this. Clearly, I don't believe anybody is interested in over-incarcerating individuals. At the same time, obviously, in our system, we deal with violent crime differently from crime that is not violent, and I think the law provides for that. So I think we all need to be well-staffed. The court is down. 10 judges will be down, 2 more judges, one at the end of this month, one at the end of next month, and that means there are 10 caseloads, going to be 12, of approximately 300 to 400 cases on an ongoing basis that would be managed by those additional judges that have been spread out to the judges that are there existing. And so that's the current situation. And when we lose the additional 2, bringing the 10 to 12, those caseloads will have to be spread out amongst our colleagues. So I just want to take the time to say I hope that as the council and other entities are considering what the court must do, that they are very realistic about what the court is doing. And I do want to take an opportunity to thank the judges, the executive officers of the court, and all of the stakeholders that we have worked with, the staff at the court, even the cleaning people who helped us to stand the court up during the pandemic. And we operated virtually for several months until we could figure out how to safely get people in the courthouse. But our criminal division arraignments, presentments, preliminary hearings, and things of that nature, they never stopped, nor did our juvenile presentments or arraignments stop in initial hearings, and nor did our domestic violence hearings stop, because we understood that the criminal justice safety net is critical to maintaining the ability of our city to function.
Here's a chance to say something nice about the media. The social media has radically changed how news is covered, and unfiltered pictures, crime scenes go out on social media all the time. There's a constant debate within the professional media. What do we show on television? What pictures do we put in the newspapers or online? In your personal opinions, do you think it's better for us to show more of these mass shootings? There have been over 200 in the country this year. Should we show some of that violence in real terms, not just people running away from it, but the deaths, the shattered bodies that AK-47s, 15s do? Should we show that, or would that just make people feel even hardened towards crime? Are we showing enough of the crime to help people oppose crime?
I think that we should be showing more of the devastation for families a month after, 6 months after, 5 years after, and the heartbreak and the whole of the loss that our families are experiencing that never goes away, even after the 24-hour news cycle is finished covering a particular incident. I worry that the more violence we see, the more desensitized we get to it. And so I would recommend more of a human element. I will just say, when it comes to media and what we are sharing, I do think those of us in this room, and I hope we can all coordinate on this, need to think proactively about how we can get removed some of these videos being posted on social media encouraging violence, encouraging crime. It's something that a number of us have talked about in the past, I know, and something I think we need to be focused on this year, on how we can work better with our social media companies to get these videos removed, because they are inspiring violence sometimes that is completely unacceptable, and I think we need to take that angle seriously as well.
Just every victim is a human being, is a member of a family, is a member of is someone's loved one. So even though we, in some respects, have become a little bit consumer culture on this, that those are human beings, that's someone's loved one. And so if we're going to talk about mass shootings or otherwise, if we want to uplift victims, which we started with community, we should remember them, how they lived or how their families would want them remembered, versus the violence and the carnage of how they died. There are ways, I think there's a that there's all sorts of things that are desensitizing us to violence and all sorts of things, and particularly our young people, whether it's TV, music, all of these things. And so I don't know that we need more violent images. I think we need to think more creatively about how we resensitize ourselves to the reality of each other's humanity.
Back in a different time in history, Emmett Till's mother insisted he have an open casket. It was riveting across the nation. Maybe we're flooded with so much violence now, it makes no difference. But anyone else on the personal feelings about what you see on television?
I actually think it's important to cover the news, and unfortunately crime dominates the news, and so it would be nice to pair that with things that are not as sensational and are positive. There are a lot of great things happening in the city, and so I think the media could focus a lot on highlighting the positive as well.
May I just say that's not going to happen.
So I'll make a pitch for traditional media over the new media that we're seeing, not pandering to the audience. So like I said earlier, crime is always a crisis, right? And it's just accurately describing the crisis. And I think one of the problems we're seeing with kind of unfiltered new media, people just posting data, is that it lacks context. And we wind up with narratives that aren't borne out in reality and don't help us to identify solutions. It is not accurate, as you saw from the chief's graph, to say that violent crime is at historic highs in this city. It's not. Shootings are at an alarming upward trend. They look to have largely plateaued over the last couple of years, but are not going down. That is a problem. Carjackings are on an upward trend. We have to accurately name our problems so that we can identify solutions. Just going out there and kind of fear-mongering and making broad claims that aren't borne out by data is not helpful, and I think we unfortunately see that from non-traditional media sometimes.
Mr. Attorney General, what do you, crime pictures on television and social media?
I'm gonna stay in the lane that I was trained in. I'm not qualified to answer that question. I can tell you that I agree with the U.S. Attorney in terms of making sure that we're telling accurate stories. And you all have heard me say this. I think we need to change the narrative about the way we talk about young people in our city. We have an extraordinary group of young people. We have an extraordinary community of young people in our city. Just to give you a little sense of the numbers, there are 50,000 people in our city who are between 10 and 17 years old. 50,000. There are less than 500 who are involved some way in our juvenile justice system right now. Do I think 500 is acceptable? Absolutely not. I agree with everything we've said. One victim, one shooter, and unfortunately too many times a juvenile shooter is a juvenile victim at the same time, is one too many. But we have an extraordinary story to tell about the young people in our city and what they're doing. When we talk about young people being out of control, when the facts don't support that, the people who get hurt the most by that are young people. It fuels the way the media talks about young people. It fuels the pressure on judges who I know resist being in a political space, but they're thrust into a political space. It puts pressure on council members. And the people who get hurt, I worry, are kids in our city. I have great optimism for the kids in our city, and that the reality is that when I see a 12-year-old with a gun, it hurts my heart, and I say, how did we get here? How do we get to a place where we're almost getting calloused in our community to hearing about a 12-year-old with a gun? How did we get to that place? When our mayor started her first term, those 12-year-olds, they were 4. When I get done with my term, the 8-year-olds in this city are going to be 12. We have an opportunity to do something about making sure we do change the narrative and change every one of those 500 kids' lives and the people who come into the system. And that's what I think we should do in terms of telling our story, making sure the narrative is accurate, and realizing that with 500 kids in a city of 700,000 people with a budget of $20 billion, can't we help those 500 kids? If any community in the country could do it, couldn't it be us? So, yes, that's how I feel about it.
I don't disagree with that. In 1855, Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build a strong child or strong children rather than to repair a broken man, and I would say man or woman. I think that's the situation we're in now. We are working in our systems. I know by the time people enter the court system, whether they're juveniles or adults, they have a long history, a lot of background and other information that they're burdened by that starts in the community, in their homes. There's a lot of trauma. I do think as kids are fearful about their safety, that is traumatizing in and of itself. They can't enjoy all the things that are provided for them to enjoy in the city. And so I think we have to work with our parents, and we just have to be honest about it. We have to hold people as parents accountable and responsible for parenting their kids, and we have to make sure they're well educated, and the whole system has to work together with a goal of making the city a greater place to live.
Right, the public policy issue is, what does accountability mean? Let me ask 2 quick questions about this, particularly juveniles, Mr. Attorney General. Every agency has statistics, some drown in statistics. But is there one agency that tracks all juvenile crime? The prevention, the arrest, the prosecution, the follow-up social services, the long-term outcomes. How do we really know how big the juvenile crime problem is? if we don't quantify it?
Well, let me just say the court actually provides a lot of information to the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council and all of our stakeholders. We are asked for data all the time on a weekly basis, and we do provide it. Of course, juvenile cases are confidential. We can provide statistics on things involving juveniles who are in our system. Court Social Services is charged statutorily with monitoring all kids on pretrial release and on probation. We work with a number of our stakeholders, the OAG, the Department of Mental Health, and the Department of Behavioral Health, and several others to provide programming and oversight of those children.
For the U.S. Attorney, as you said, D.C. is unique in having the U.S. Attorney prosecute our major adult crimes, but that office does not routinely release statistics on its work. Mr. Graves, you do meet with community leaders like today, but could you do more to routinely share information on why you do or don't prosecute crimes brought to you by police? Recent U.S. Attorney stats reinforce that many crimes aren't prosecuted. Isn't an informed citizenry a better citizenry?
Yes, an informed citizenry is a better citizenry, and we are constantly trying to come up with new ways of sharing data. One issue that has traditionally hamstrung us is we are working, our system, our software for processing cases was built about 40 years ago. It was not designed to report out data. So every time we get a request for how many homicides have you prosecuted in this period, or pick the crime, someone has to manually go through and pull the data. We are working with the Department of Justice, and we are hopeful that we will get a new system in place that is a multi-year project. So in the interim, we have hired, for the first time in our office's history, a data scientist who's been able to help us pull some of the data. It's someone, a full-time employee, that all they're doing is going through our data because of how cumbersome it is. And we are going to start publishing monthly statistics on key prosecutorial metrics so that the citizenry has a better understanding. Look, on individual cases, I understand everybody's inclination and desire to want to understand individual prosecutorial charging decisions. But particularly when we don't charge someone, that's when our ethical obligations are the highest not to talk about the case. It's not some desire to keep information from the public, but it's just a basic constitutional right. The government, prosecutorial arm, as has famously been said, speaks in indictments. And if we have not indicted someone, in general, we don't go out and talk about their criminal activity or why their criminal activity or alleged criminal activity in our minds was not sufficient enough to charge.
Can I just add to that? Yeah, well, and I want to just echo the U.S. Attorney's point on that, because sometimes the way papering and charging decisions get covered and talked about is a suggestion that the system is not working. And in fact, in our constitutional system, it's exactly the opposite. What it shows is that prosecutors working with law enforcement are trying to build cases, are looking at the evidence and deciding whether there's enough evidence to charge somebody, meeting the standard for proving somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. We don't want to live in a city where we charge people without enough evidence to hold them accountable. We don't want to arrest people when we don't have probable cause, and we don't want to charge people when we don't have sufficient evidence. So I think it's an indication that our system works. It also shows, and I can tell you that in real time, the prosecutors in the Office of Attorney General, and I know the prosecutors in the U.S. Attorney's Office, are working with our law enforcement to make sure that we are building cases that will withstand constitutional scrutiny, that juries will find beyond a reasonable doubt are leading to convictions. And so if we can talk about the decisions not as revolving door or a failure of our system, but in fact a confirmation that our system is working, I think we would move the ball forward.
Thank you for that. I wholeheartedly agree, and it reminds me of another point that I want to make with respect to the other part of your question, which is the felonies were, the reporting around felonies that were ultimately not charged. It has always been and will always be the policy of the office for as long as I am in this position that we will charge every felony with which we are presented that we think we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Full stop.
Now, we have to go through a complicated analysis when cases are presented to us. And the Attorney General is exactly right. It is not a choice to decide not to prosecute a case if we think that there isn't probable cause. It is not a choice to decide not to prosecute a case if we think that despite the best efforts of our law enforcement partners, there were constitutional violations that occurred. That is not a choice. Deciding not to prosecute there is as automatic as it is for me to breathe. It would be a violation of my ethical obligations if I went forward under those circumstances, and we are never, ever going to charge people if we think it violates our ethical obligations to do so.
Yeah, we're about out of time. I'm going to try to squeeze in two more questions. The word carjacking was mentioned earlier. I will say when I go around the city and you talk to people obviously about homicides and whatever, carjackings, the fear of carjacking. Earlier this year in January, in an exit interview, Carl Racine, the Attorney General, told the Washington Post that he was afraid, that he, every time he went out with his car, filled his tank with gas so that his partner and mother of his two children would not have to risk going to a DC filling station to get gas. That, to me, was an extraordinary thing for the Attorney General to say at the time. But carjackings, ATVs racing through the streets with little or no consequence, motorists ignoring millions in tickets that are given. Who controls the streets of Washington?
I was going to say.
I know she's just passing the mic.
So the mic is wound up with me. Look, we, the community, controls the streets of Washington, D.C. There are certainly incidents that you can point to like that. But when we have conversations like this, and I drive around my district, I walk around my neighborhood, I don't see the scale of what everyone else is, of that narrative. I don't.
Where do you live?
Yeah, well, I live in the district. Yes, I live in the district. Yes, general geographic area is the district. I'm not going to get into where I specifically live. But I think it's important to lose that. I mean, we have a crisis. There is no denying it. We have to deal with the shootings. We have to deal with the carjackings. But we have so much positive going on in our district, we have to balance the conversation and remember that as well.
Yeah, just the only thing that I would say is that I will continue to say that we recognize there has to be accountability. And so we really do need to look at, it does affect residents if they see ATVs and and they feel there's no enforcement, or see where there's thousands of dollars worth of tickets and they don't feel this enforcement. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us to look at our systems to say, do we have mechanisms for enforcement of those things? Certainly the Metropolitan Police Department has an ATV task force and others to ensure that people are acting in a safe manner on the road. But there may be some gaps, right? Because we do see that there are people with thousands of dollars of tickets. And so I think that's an opportunity for us to look at where is that gap and close it.
And our last question. Go ahead. We'll wrap this up with your final remarks. We've had major public discussions in the district over police assigned to schools, euphemistically called school resource officers. Critics say police presence criminalizes the students. Supporters say trained police who focus on de-escalation have value. The council has voted to phase out school resource officers, but there is an indication from some of the members, including one on this panel, that maybe you'll reconsider that, as Alexandria has, and do better school policing rather than no school policing. Thoughts? Maybe, Ms. Pinto, I think you're part of the bill, so you start that. But remember, out of time, the mayor's getting anxious, so if y'all quick. So answer as quickly as you can, and it's such a heavy question, then we'll all applaud you regardless of what you said.
We'll revisit that later. So yes, the School Safety Division of MPD, I think, is a very important function of our police department to be in our schools, help understand conflicts that are arising among students, and be there if, on a very unfortunate incident, violence does arise. I think several years ago, there was an important conversation, and that conversation should continue, about how we can adequately support our kids with more mental health supports, with more safe passage, with helping them understand conflict management in the school context. And I am very supportive of those continued investments. My colleague, Councilmember Parker, has introduced a bill for great ideas around school safety. I think we should continue supporting investments like that. But we cannot remove the tool we have, which is our school resource officers, before we've figured out what Plan B is. And so that's kind of where I land on it, and we supported returning this division through our committee, and I hope that the council will do the same when we vote on the budget on Tuesday.
Any final thought? Very quick, please.
Mayor,
Oh, yes,
say
Judge.
something. Obviously, we have a lot of kids come into our system, and they're school-age kids. They're in the juvenile delinquency system. And even in our adult system, I think our data would show that a lot of people are just not getting a high school degree or have some educational deficits. I do think that is the gateway into our system, because if people cannot survive legitimately, if they don't have an education, they don't have basic skills, they're going to have to figure out how to survive. So I think that is so critical. I just want to highlight a few things. We have drug courts, mental health courts, fathering courts, hope courts, all kind of courts, family treatment courts. We have all these things, even though we're the court, because people come into our system with these problems, and we wanted alternatives to just locking them up over and over and over again when they would have a finite period of incarceration, certainly for petty offenses.
One more minute. We're over time. We could never do this in television.
Sorry. So I already talked about how blessed we are to have the Metropolitan Police Department, and I also want to name our federal law enforcement partners, a number of whom are sitting here today, and it's just representative. When we make the call, they're there for us. And I want to let the community know that in my dozen or so years of working in this business, I've never seen all of the major partners so aligned on a strategy of getting our community to where it needs to be from a public safety perspective. We are working tirelessly on this issue. Unfortunately, some of this stuff takes time. We did not get into this situation in 1 year. We're not going to get out of it in 1 year. I wish we could, because we feel the tragedy of every homicide, but we are working, and we are confident in where we are going to be at the end of this process.
Would you please thank the panel? Thank you.
That was wonderful.
Okay with it.
Oh, it was perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Don't say something nice to me in the microphone.
Okay, I should say, what a wonderful, thank you, that was fantastic.
Okay, here, executive.
I don't know what's next.
I got it, yep. Next is the mayor. Here we go, ma'am.
Thank you. Well, Tom, I want to thank you for agreeing to moderate. Give Tom a big round of applause. As well as our officials who joined us, the Attorney General, our U.S. Attorney, our Chief Judge, our Council Member, and also the Deputy Mayor for asking and providing some perspective from D.C. government agencies. The plan for the remainder for the next 30 minutes or so are to go into breakout sessions, but I thought before we did that, we would entertain a few questions from those gathered. Any suggestions? Yes, Council Member.
AG, who's doing a wonderful job. Okay.
Let the councilman. Thank you.
But I think there's a disconnect that has it. The elephant in the room is that MPD is investigating, trying to get people off the streets, and when they go to court, they're not getting convicted and coming back to the community. I don't know what's going on with that. Can someone speak to what is really going on with? I think I read that 65% of those who are arrested with guns were released back on the streets. Like, if there's no recourse, there's no balance. I don't know how the judicial system is really working on behalf of the community.
Okay, I think the U.S. Attorney and both our prosecutors spoke a little to their work with MPD and how their office determines if they have enough evidence or if they have a case that will likely result in a conviction. But I don't want to speak for you. Do you want to say anything?
Communication.
What's what?
What's the break in communication? Because if they need this and they don't have that, I'm not for over-policing, but we have to have a balance.
Mr. Graves, will you talk about your kind of data efforts in keeping the community informed of prosecutorial decisions? I will also mention, well, I'll let you go and say that.
All right, so just to clarify the numbers. So the reporting was around 67% of total arrests, not firearms arrests. The overwhelming number of arrests in our jurisdiction are misdemeanors. Misdemeanor drug possession, misdemeanor shoplifting, those trespass, those are really common offenses. What has led the primary driver to why we've seen an increase in the cases that are not charged at papering are misdemeanor offenses. And there are unique circumstances around them. With drug possession, which makes up a bulk of our misdemeanor offenses, we of course have not been able to test drugs since DFS lost its accreditation, which we just talked about on the last panel. If we cannot prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the suspected substance is a drug, then we can't prosecute. That's been a big part of the story. You asked specifically about firearms, so let's talk about firearms. As I said before, it has always been the policy of our office, and it will continue to be the policy of our office. Whenever we think we have a firearms arrest that we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, we are charging that case. There are no cases where we say, we think there's enough here, but we are not bringing charges. That simply does not happen. And again, I'm so happy that you were able to participate in the crime briefing, because during the course of the crime briefing, you heard the conversation about firearms recoveries. What was papered in district court, what was charged in district court, what was charged in superior court, and what wasn't charged, and why they weren't charged. And these are the kinds of common examples of what we see, right? That there, in one instance, it was deemed that there wasn't enough of a basis for the stop to have occurred in the first place, and a court likely would have suppressed the gun, said the stop was constitutionally not valid. In other instances, there was more investigation that needs to be done, which is an important part of this story. What we are doing at the time of the arrest does not dictate what ultimately happens with the case. In many of our felonies, we agree that there is a situation, there is something that we want to continue to investigate. We just don't have enough evidence at that point in time to go forward. So we decline prosecution, but we continue to investigate. So that's a big part of your question. The other part is, in the cases that we charge, what happens? And we can have conversations about the cases we charge and changes that we think need to be made to the system. The frustration of people being back out in the community. Okay, we prosecute in the context of the laws that are passed by the district. With respect to pretrial detention, the laws that have been enacted in this jurisdiction say the presumption is that you are going to be released back into the community, except for extremely limited circumstances. And it's often a high burden for us under current law to get someone held pre-trial. Full stop. So that is why you're seeing that phenomenon. If people want to have a conversation about how we change those presumptions, we are more than happy to have that conversation. We are in favor of some of those changes. Candidly, that has not been where the dialogue has been over the last decade or so. The dialogue has been over how can we have more people released because they have not yet been convicted. With respect to our success rates at trials, we are doing everything we can to present the most effective cases possible. There have been challenges. It's been very interesting with the body-worn camera. We've had to really adjust the way that we are trying cases. Unfortunately, the way the body-worn camera works, right, it is not at the officer's eyes. It does not capture everything that occurred. So that case that we talked about where there was a toss of the weapon, in years past, we would have been able to have officers go in and describe it. In that particular case that you were briefed on today, what happened was, because of the angle the officers were running at, the toss wasn't actually captured on camera. So what we're seeing from our jurors and our judges is when things are not caught on camera, we have to have strategies now, because it should make sense that if I took my iPhone out and put it on my chest, it wouldn't see everything, particularly as I turn my head. But that is a new phenomenon. So those are the kinds of things we're dealing with. We will get those right on our end. And, you know, our community members, I recently issued a call for we need people to show up for jury duty. We need people to understand the oath that they take and the seriousness of the offenses, and not to be litigating in the jury box whether they think these things should be crimes or not.
So the U.S. Attorney mentioned some things that could be changed in the law. I think part of your question, Councilmember, and correct me if I got it wrong, a crime happened, somebody was shot, somebody may have been murdered, MPD made an arrest after they've established probable cause, and that person could be released into the community pending their trial. And what I will recommend is that we change the presumption, especially in cases of violent crime where someone has already been convicted of a violent crime. We think that the court should have in their decision-making the ability to detain that person until the trial happens. So that will be one part and a big part of the legislation that I advance to the council to help deal with what I think are some gaps in our law. I do that with great seriousness and understanding the trade-offs involved. I think I know I speak for all of us. We believe that everyone should be afforded the presumption of innocence until they have their trial. But we also think when people have demonstrated that they will use violence and use it again and again in our community, that we have to use every tool at our disposal. Yes, Councilmember.
Thank you, Mayor Bowser, and thank you for convening this gathering. If I could ask a follow-up question to the U.S. Attorney. Mr. Graves, I heard you clearly when you were talking about the differences in terms of felonies versus misdemeanors. I'm curious, and I know that you said you hired a data scientist, you may not have this information, but of the 67, we have aggregate numbers that we're having to respond to in community, right? They hear 67%. They don't necessarily know what is distinguished between a felony, a homicide, or a misdemeanor in that. But in your response to Councilmember White, you said the vast majority of the declarations are misdemeanors. Are you not concerned that that's sending a signal to the community that the misdemeanors, which are more often than not what people see, right? The quote-unquote open-air drug markets, the you stole something from the Wawa or the 7-Eleven, these things get reported on the evening news. And what it seems like is we're focusing more on felonies and not misdemeanors, which, if left unchecked, then become felonies.
Yeah, so to be clear, I think prosecuting misdemeanors for a lot of the reasons you just said is incredibly important. I know there's been a conversation in this district. There have been editorials that have run that the U.S. Attorney's Office should just stop prosecuting misdemeanors. My immediate successor wrote an editorial back saying, no, we're not going to stop prosecuting misdemeanors. They're incredibly important. Again, a lot of this is not a choice, as I said before. If I can't prove the substance that you're possessing is a drug, then I can't charge the case ethically. With the shoplifting cases, and some of the other misdemeanors, right? Another change that was made in the prior administration is we are investigating or doing a closer look at some of these misdemeanors at the time of arrest to make sure that we're actually going to be able to successfully prosecute the cases, not just that we have enough evidence on the face of it to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. So what you'd often see in shoplifting cases and simple assault cases, let's start with the shoplifting, is the store owners would initially want the person arrested, but when it was explained to them that if it was a mom and pop shop, they would have to come down themselves to court for a day and shut down their store for a day, or if it was a big box store that they were going to have to pay for an employee to go down for a day to testify in court, they would often say, no thanks, we're not interested in doing it. So we would charge the case, we would spend prosecutorial resources building the case, we would get to the trial, literally the morning of trial, and then we would find out that we didn't have essential witnesses and dismiss the case. So we're doing a better job of investigating those things on the front end. My call to the community is, on these shoplifting cases, if they matter to the store owners, then we will prosecute them. But we need to get into a place where we understand as a community all the constraints with which we're dealing. And in terms of the message that we're trying to send through these prosecutions, yes, like we totally get that these, while they do not relate to the violence conversation we're having, they don't relate to shootings, they don't relate to carjackings, this is in some ways the things that most community members fortunately see the most. They care about it, adds to the level of lawlessness. As the mayor's office has done a great job of identifying a new vendor who can start testing drugs. And we're already starting to deploy some strategies in some of the areas where we have some of the most nuisance crime to try to aggressively prosecute and use all the tools in our arsenal to try to deal with some of those issues. It is top of mind to us.
I do want to ask Kevin to be on deck to talk a little bit more about DFS. And it is an important matter because it's a matter in front of the council right now. The U.S. Attorney will know that I feel strongly about how we got here. But we'll put that to the side. The question is, how do we get beyond where we need to be? So what I have asked the council to do is to ensure that my office is responsible for the turnaround of DFS. This is going to reverse something that it did in the fall. Which won't make the city safer and won't allow us to build a better DFS. So I'm very specifically asking them to do this. And I'm also very specifically asking them to focus on the hard sciences and to work with the U.S. Attorney on vendors that he likes and will have confidence in on all of the other work of DFS. I've asked that public health and our Department of Health focus on the public health laboratory, and I've asked MPD to do what MPD did for decades, and that's collect evidence. And in fact, the evidence collectors at DFS now, they're mostly MPD or former MPD. And so in doing that and focusing on the very discrete work that needs to happen for the crime lab and working with our number one customer, let me be very clear about this, is the U.S. Attorney's Office. And so we want to be very focused on that. But I also want the U.S. Attorney to recognize the vast resources of the federal government. And it will be unacceptable to us to say that we don't have this when we know what the Justice Department can do when it wants to do something. And so from locally, we will, of course, support resources necessary for any types of testing. But we also want to make sure that we have a lab that's not only sustainable for now, but sustainable for the long term. And that's what the legislative fix is that we have before the council. And I want to invite any of the council members to ask us questions about that so that we can really be focused on the future of the lab. Kevin, if you would provide us a quick overview.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we heard, there was a presentation earlier today by the Chief of Staff at DFS, and there was a lot of process involved and a lot of referencing standards. It's really important, and I think the big picture you heard referenced a few times by the U.S. Attorney's Office and the value and need to be able to have an expectation that we test evidence for DNA and other forensic imprints on evidence. Was the Deputy Mayor for Public Safety for 6.5 years. I've also had the perspective of seeing DFS evolve over 8 years. In that time, the agency has stopped at least part of its work twice and had a couple of directors with long careers leave abruptly. It is incredibly important that the agency be able to focus on being able to get its internal lab back working. Now, when it was fully functioning and was humming, the impact of the work is profound. The U.S. Attorney mentioned part of it, which is sort of testing guns. One little known fact is that when the mayor both got the lab fully functioning, doubled its internal scientific staff. I remember being at a police briefing and saw the closure rates for burglaries and for robberies had gone up almost 50%. And when I asked detectives why that was, when I asked the chief why that was, often in separate settings, often in community, they would typically start with, of course, really good police work. They'd always follow up with, we were able to really test a lot of evidence for DNA, for fingerprints, test ballistics. And so it has a really profound effect, even both on gun cases, but also on burglaries and robberies. So the proposal, because we have a significant segment of the council here before the council, is to do a couple of things. And there's some things that don't require law. So we have increased the funding over the years for DFS, so it has scientific, a body of scientific staff that do outstanding work. We protect the integrity of what they do and don't get involved in it. We make sure we have a strong science advisory board so they have good oversight by scientists and good stakeholder engagement among the different customers of DFS. It is also important, though, that DFS really be able to focus on what it does at its core, which is forensic work, and the whole agency was able to focus on getting back to accreditation so every gun can be tested by an internal team of scientists. It is also important, and I'll stop with this, that the agency have the strength of being able to report to the mayor. I'm not involved, I'm not the deputy mayor for public safety anymore, but I am involved in trying to recruit a new director. And the expectation of every candidate that's highly qualified that I talk to is that the agency has a leadership structure that basically reflects what it looks like everywhere else in the country, which is people are used to reporting to governors. The closest equivalent here we have is to the mayor. So that is one part that's really essential in getting good leadership and focus so we can be humming again. And some of those cases that the U.S. Attorney talked to has that DNA tested internally, and other crimes that don't get quite the attention have that power that the detectives see the impact of.
So I appreciate everyone allowing me to pivot a little bit. I thought that people wanted to get some questions out before we go into breakouts, and we're going to have to move to those breakout sessions now. Linda Harley Harper, who is our Office of Gun Violence Prevention and our WONS Director, is going to be leading discussions about juveniles, and she, of course, will be talking about alternatives to policing, our violence interruption efforts that are also part of our ecosystem, as the Deputy Mayor mentioned. Christy Love, who is our newly appointed, but not new, CJCC Director, will help lead the discussion around the adult system and what we're all doing to make our city safer. Later in the week or early next week, I expect to gather some of the information that we discussed today to advance a piece of legislation to the council. I expect that we will be talking about accountability, intervention, and more importantly, about how all of our efforts can be transparent to the people of the District of Columbia. So we won't come back to this room, so I'll say thank you, and we're counting on you to have good ideas, to work together for all our neighbors and communities. Thank you, everybody.